Hello friends. Did you know that nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your interaction not only supports the channel's growth, but also helps these stories reach more people. Thank you all for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. The first time I saw them running, I thought it was just teenagers playing some kind of late-night game. It was 2:17 a.m. on a humid Tuesday in July, and I was patrolling the back roads of Millfield County when my headlights caught movement at the edge of the forest that bordered Highway 9. 3 figures were running through the tall grass beside the road, moving in single file toward the tree line. They were moving fast, faster than seemed normal for people running in the dark across uneven terrain. In the brief moment my headlights illuminated them, I could see they were wearing dark clothing and appeared to be adults rather than the teenagers I had initially assumed. I pulled my patrol car over and got out, calling across the field. "Millfield County Sheriff's Department. Is everything all right over there?" The figures didn't stop or acknowledge my presence. They reached the edge of the forest and disappeared into the trees without so much as pausing to look back. The entire encounter lasted maybe 15 seconds, but something about it felt wrong in a way I couldn't immediately articulate. I radioed dispatch to report the incident. "Unit 12 to dispatch. I just observed 3 individuals running into the forest near mile marker 7 on Highway 9. No response to verbal contact. Appears they may be lost or in distress." Dispatcher Mary Sullivan's voice crackled back through the radio. "Copy that, Unit 12. Any signs of criminal activity or emergency situation?" "Negative at this time. Just unusual behavior for this time of night. I'm going to check the area." "Copy. Let us know if you need backup." I grabbed my flashlight and walked across the field to where the figures had entered the forest. The ground was soft from recent rain, and I could clearly see footprints in the mud leading into the trees. 3 sets of prints, all appearing to be from adult-sized shoes or boots. What struck me as odd was the spacing of the footprints. The stride length suggested the individuals had been running at a full sprint, which seemed dangerous in the dark forest terrain. I followed the tracks about 50 yards into the woods before the trail became too difficult to follow in the darkness. The forest was dense with oak and maple trees, typical for this part of Vermont. During the day, it was beautiful hiking country. At night, it was nearly impenetrable without proper lighting. I couldn't understand why anyone would choose to run through this terrain in the dark. I returned to my patrol car and continued my route, but the incident stayed with me for the rest of my shift. In my 8 years with the Millfield County Sheriff's Department, I had seen plenty of unusual late-night behavior. Drunk teenagers, people having mental health crises, the occasional person trying to evade law enforcement for various reasons. But something about the way those 3 individuals had been running felt different. They had moved with purpose and coordination, like they knew exactly where they were going. And they had completely ignored my presence, which was unusual. Most people, even those engaged in illegal activities, would at least acknowledge a police officer's call before deciding whether to flee. Over the next 3 nights, I made sure to patrol Highway 9 around the same time, curious to see if the runners would appear again. On Thursday night, I saw nothing unusual. Friday night was quiet except for a drunk driver I had to arrest near the county line. But on Saturday night, they were back. This time, I was ready for them. I had positioned my patrol car on a side road with a clear view of the stretch of Highway 9 where I had first seen the runners. I turned off my headlights and waited. At 2:23 a.m., they appeared. 4 figures this time, running in the same single-file formation across the field toward the forest. I observed them through binoculars and could see they were definitely adults, all wearing dark clothing that made them difficult to distinguish individually. They moved with the same urgent purpose I had observed 3 nights earlier. I waited until they were about halfway across the field before turning on my headlights and spotlight. The bright light illuminated the entire area, clearly revealing the 4 runners. For a moment, they were frozen in the beam like deer caught in headlights. What I saw in that moment would haunt me for years to come. The 4 individuals were wearing strange, flowing garments that seemed to blend with their skin in the harsh light. They appeared to be men and women of various ages, though it was difficult to tell specifics from the distance. But what disturbed me most was their faces. Even from several hundred yards away, I could see that their expressions were blank, almost vacant, as if they were sleepwalking or in some kind of trance. After a moment of being frozen in the light, they resumed running toward the forest, moving just as quickly as before. Within seconds, they had disappeared into the trees. I immediately radioed for backup and followed the same path I had taken earlier in the week. This time, the footprints in the soft ground told a clearer story. 4 sets of bare feet, no shoes or boots. The prints showed that all 4 individuals had been running at full speed across terrain that would have been painful and dangerous for unprotected feet. Officer Susan Williams arrived as backup within 20 minutes. She was a 10-year veteran of the department and someone I trusted to take unusual situations seriously without jumping to dramatic conclusions. "What's the situation, Patterson?" she asked as she joined me at the edge of the forest. 4 individuals appeared to be naked, running into the forest. No response to police presence. Based on the footprints, they were barefoot and running at full speed across this terrain. Williams examined the footprints with her flashlight. "These tracks are deep. They were really moving fast. Any idea who they might be or why they're out here?" "No identification yet. This is the second time I've seen runners in this area, though the first time they were clothed and I couldn't get a good look at them." "Could be some kind of initiation or ritual," Williams suggested. "College kids do crazy things sometimes." "Maybe, but the nearest college is 40 miles away, and this seemed more organized than typical student pranks." We followed the tracks into the forest for about 100 yards before losing the trail on rocky ground. The woods were dense and difficult to navigate even with flashlights. Without proper equipment and daylight, there was no way to effectively search for the individuals. "We should come back in the morning with the search team," Williams suggested. "If these people are lost or injured in the woods, they're going to need help." I agreed, but something told me we weren't dealing with people who were lost. The purposeful way they had been running, the coordination of their movement, and their complete lack of response to police presence suggested they knew exactly where they were going. We returned to our patrol cars, and I filed a report documenting the incident. But as I drove home after my shift ended, I couldn't shake the image of those 4 pale figures running naked through the night with blank, vacant expressions on their faces. The next morning, I returned to the forest with Officer Williams and 2 other deputies to conduct a daylight search. We brought a tracking dog and search equipment, hoping to find some trace of where the runners had gone or what had happened to them. What we discovered was more puzzling than anything I had encountered in my law enforcement career. The daylight search of the forest revealed a trail that was both clear and inexplicable. The tracks of the 4 barefoot runners continued for nearly 2 miles through dense woodland, following what appeared to be animal paths and deer trails rather than any established hiking routes. Officer Williams led the search team while I coordinated with the tracking dog, a German shepherd named Rex who had been trained for search and rescue operations. Rex immediately picked up the scent trail from the footprints we had found the night before and led us deeper into the forest than I had ever ventured. "These tracks are consistent the whole way," Williams observed as we followed the trail. 4 individuals, moving at the same pace, staying in single file. It's like they knew exactly where they were going. What disturbed me most was the condition of the trail itself. The footprints showed that the runners had maintained their full-speed pace for the entire 2-mile distance, across terrain that included rocky areas, fallen logs, and steep inclines that would have been treacherous to navigate in daylight, let alone in complete darkness. How did they move this fast through here without getting injured? Deputy Patricia Rodriguez asked as we climbed over a fallen tree that blocked the path. Some of these obstacles would be challenging for experienced hikers with proper equipment. The tracking dog led us to a clearing about 3 miles from Highway 9, where the trail suddenly ended. The clearing was roughly circular, perhaps 50 feet in diameter, surrounded by dense forest on all sides. In the center of the clearing was a ring of stones that appeared to have been arranged deliberately. "This looks like some kind of campsite," Williams said, examining the stone ring. "But there's no evidence of recent fire or camping activity." I walked the perimeter of the clearing, looking for any sign of where the 4 runners might have gone after reaching this location. Rex, the tracking dog, circled the clearing repeatedly but seemed unable to pick up any scent leading away from the area. "The trail just stops here," I reported to Williams. "No tracks leading out of the clearing, no sign of where they went next." Deputy Rodriguez was examining the stone ring more closely. "These stones have been here for a while," she observed. "They're partially embedded in the ground, like they've been in place for years." The clearing felt different from the surrounding forest. It was quieter, with less birdsong and wildlife activity. The air seemed heavier, more oppressive. Even Rex appeared uncomfortable, staying close to my side instead of ranging freely as he normally would during searches. "We should document everything and get crime scene techs out here," Williams decided. "This might be connected to some kind of cult activity or ritual behavior." While we waited for the crime scene team to arrive, I explored the edges of the clearing more thoroughly. It was then that I noticed something that made the situation even more disturbing. Carved into several of the trees around the perimeter were symbols that appeared to be of human origin. They were crude but deliberate markings, cut deep into the bark with what looked like a knife or other sharp instrument. Some of the symbols resembled letters or numbers, while others were geometric patterns that I didn't recognize. "Williams, you need to see this," I called out, pointing to the carved symbols. She examined the markings with her flashlight, even though it was broad daylight. "These look old," she said. "The bark has started to grow back around some of them." "But some look newer," I observed, pointing to a set of symbols that showed fresh cuts with no bark regrowth. Crime scene technician Michael Torres arrived with his team around noon. They began systematically photographing and documenting the clearing, the stone ring, and the carved symbols on the trees. "This is definitely a site that's been used repeatedly over time," Torres observed after examining the evidence. "The stone ring shows signs of multiple uses, and the tree carvings span several different time periods." "Any idea what the symbols mean?" Williams asked. "I'll need to research them, but some appear to be variations of symbols used in various folk traditions and ritualistic practices. The newer ones might be modern additions to an older site." While the crime scene team worked, I decided to canvass the local area to see if any residents had information about the clearing or had noticed unusual activity in the forest. The nearest house was about 5 miles away, belonging to an elderly farmer named Robert Davis, who had lived in the area his entire life. Davis was working in his vegetable garden when I arrived. He was a man in his 70s with weathered hands, and the kind of practical demeanor typical of rural Vermont farmers. "Officer Patterson," he greeted me. "Don't usually see police out this way unless someone's in trouble." "Mr. Davis, I'm investigating some unusual activity in the forest near Highway 9. Have you noticed anything strange lately? People coming or going at odd hours. Davis paused in his gardening and looked toward the forest. Funny you should ask. I've been hearing voices in the woods at night for the past couple weeks. Thought it might be teenagers or hunters, but it's been happening too regularly. What kind of voices? Hard to say exactly. It sounds like chanting or singing, very faint. Always around 2 or 3 in the morning. My wife thought I was imagining things until she heard it too last week. Have you seen anyone going into the forest? No, but I found something odd a few days ago. Davis led me to the edge of his property, where a well-worn path led into the woods. Found clothes here, just scattered on the ground. Men's and women's clothing, shoes, looked like they'd been dropped in a hurry. Do you still have the clothes? I gathered them up and put them in my barn. Figured someone might come looking for them. Seemed strange to leave good clothes just lying around. Davis showed me to his barn, where he had collected approximately a dozen items of clothing. Jeans, shirts, underwear, shoes, a mix of men's and women's clothing in various sizes. All appeared to be in good condition, as if they had been recently worn and then simply discarded. Mr. Davis, I'm going to need to take these clothes as evidence. Can you show me exactly where you found them? The location where Davis had found the clothing was less than a mile from the clearing where the runner's trail had ended. It appeared to be another access point to the same general area of forest. As I drove back to the station with the clothing evidence, I began to piece together a disturbing pattern. People were gathering in the forest at night, removing their clothes and engaging in some kind of activity that involved running through the woods to a specific location. But what happened to them after they reached the clearing remained a mystery. Back at the station, I reported my findings to Sheriff William Murphy, a 30-year veteran who had seen his share of unusual cases, but was always careful to base conclusions on evidence rather than speculation. So, we have naked people running through the forest to a clearing with ritual markings, and we have discarded clothing found by a local farmer, Sheriff Murphy summarized. Any missing persons reports that might be connected? I checked with surrounding counties. No reports of missing adults in the past month. If these are local people, their families don't know they're missing. Could be people coming from outside the area, specifically for whatever's happening in that clearing. That's possible, but the regular schedule suggests it might be locals who are returning home after whatever they're doing in the forest. Sheriff Murphy leaned back in his chair, considering the situation. We need to set up surveillance. If this is happening regularly, we should be able to observe and document whatever's going on. That evening, I returned to Highway 9 with a night vision camera and positioned myself in a location where I could observe both the field where I had seen the runners and the clearing in the forest. Officer Williams was stationed at the farmer's property to watch the other access point. At exactly 2:19 a.m., they appeared again. This time, there were 6 individuals, all naked, running in single file across the field. Through the night vision camera, I could see their faces clearly for the first time. They appeared to be local residents, people I recognized from around town, including a bank teller I had spoken with just days earlier, and a mechanic who had worked on my personal vehicle. But their expressions were the same blank, vacant look I had observed before. They moved like sleepwalkers, running at full speed toward the forest, with no apparent awareness of their surroundings or the danger they were putting themselves in. I radioed Williams. I have 6 subjects moving toward the forest. They appear to be local residents, but something is definitely wrong with their behavior. Copy that. I'm in position at the other access point. I followed the runners at a distance, using the night vision camera to document their progress through the forest. They moved along the same trail we had found during the daylight search, maintaining their coordinated pace despite the obstacles and difficult terrain. When they reached the clearing, what I witnessed through the camera would change forever how I understood the boundaries between normal and abnormal human behavior. The 6 naked figures arranged themselves around the stone ring in the center of the clearing, standing perfectly still for several minutes. Through my night vision camera, I could see their faces clearly, expressionless, almost serene, as if they were in a deep meditative state. Then they began to move in a pattern that was clearly choreographed. They walked around the stone ring in a clockwise direction, their steps synchronized like a military drill. As they walked, they began to make sounds, not quite chanting, not quite singing, but a low, rhythmic vocalization that carried through the still night air. I was positioned about 100 yards away, hidden behind a fallen log that provided good cover while giving me a clear view of the clearing. The night vision camera was recording everything, but I knew that what I was witnessing needed to be documented with multiple officers as witnesses. I radioed Williams to update her on the situation. The subjects have reached the clearing and are engaged in what appears to be some kind of ritual activity. I need you to move to my position to provide witness testimony. On my way. Estimated arrival in 15 minutes. The ritual continued as I waited for Williams to arrive. The 6 individuals maintained their circular movement around the stone ring for approximately 20 minutes, their vocalizations growing more intense and rhythmic. The sounds they were making didn't resemble any language I recognized, but there was a structure to it that suggested meaning and purpose. What disturbed me most was their apparent lack of awareness of the cold and the rough terrain. The temperature was probably in the low 50s, and the ground in the clearing was covered with rocks and fallen branches that would have been painful on bare feet. But the 6 individuals showed no signs of discomfort or awareness of their physical situation. Williams arrived and positioned herself beside me behind the fallen log. "What's the current situation?" she whispered. "They've been walking in circles around that stone ring for about 20 minutes, making those vocalizations. No sign of any leadership or direction. They all seem to know exactly what they're supposed to be doing." "Any indication of drug use or mental impairment?" "Nothing obvious, but their behavior is definitely not normal. They're acting like they're in some kind of trance state." As we watched, the ritual took a new turn. The 6 individuals stopped their circular movement and arranged themselves in a line facing the stone ring. They stood motionless for several minutes, then, one by one, they began to walk toward the ring. The first person, a woman I recognized as a local grocery store clerk, stepped into the center of the stone ring and lay down on the ground. She arranged herself in a specific position, arms crossed over her chest, legs straight, eyes closed. She looked like she was preparing for burial. The other 5 individuals continued their vocalizations while the woman lay motionless in the center of the ring. After about 10 minutes, she stood up and rejoined the group, and the next person took a turn lying in the center of the ring. "They're taking turns lying in that stone circle," I whispered to Williams, "like they're participating in some kind of death ritual. Should we intervene?" I considered the question carefully. The individuals weren't obviously in danger, and they appeared to be participating voluntarily in whatever was happening. As disturbing as their behavior was, I wasn't sure we had legal grounds to interrupt them. "Let's continue observing for now. We need to understand what we're dealing with before we take action." Each of the 6 individuals took a turn lying in the center of the stone ring, while the others continued their rhythmic vocalizations. The entire process took about an hour, with each person spending approximately 10 minutes in the prone position inside the ring. After the last person had completed their turn in the stone ring, the group's behavior changed dramatically. They stopped their vocalizations and stood in complete silence for several minutes. Then, without any apparent signal or communication, they turned and began walking toward the edge of the clearing. But they didn't head back toward Highway 9 where I had first seen them running. Instead, they walked to the opposite side of the clearing and disappeared into the forest in a direction we hadn't explored during our daylight search. "We need to follow them," I told Williams. "But carefully. We don't want to lose them, but we also don't want to interfere with whatever they're doing." We followed the group at a distance, using our night vision equipment to track their movement through the dense forest. They moved with the same purposeful coordination they had shown earlier, following what appeared to be another well-established trail. After about a mile, the trail led to a second clearing, smaller than the first but containing similar stone arrangements. This clearing also had carved symbols on the surrounding trees, though these markings appeared to be newer and more elaborate than what we had found at the first site. The 6 individuals repeated a similar ritual at the second location, though this time their vocalizations were different, higher-pitched and more urgent. They spent less time at the second clearing, perhaps 30 minutes total, before moving on to what appeared to be a third location. "How many of these sites are there?" Williams whispered as we followed the group deeper into the forest. "I don't know, but this is clearly a well-established pattern. They know exactly where they're going and what they're supposed to do at each location." The third clearing was the largest we had encountered, with multiple stone rings and more elaborate tree carvings. The ritual at this location was more complex, involving the entire group lying down simultaneously within a large circular arrangement of stones. As they lay motionless in the stone circle, their vocalizations stopped completely. The forest became eerily quiet, with no sounds of wildlife or wind. Even the normal night sounds that provide a constant background in wooded areas seemed to have ceased. After about 20 minutes of complete silence, something extraordinary happened. The 6 individuals stood up simultaneously, as if responding to a signal that Williams and I couldn't detect. But their movements were different now, more coordinated, more purposeful, almost mechanical. They arranged themselves in a single file line and began walking toward the edge of the clearing. But as they walked, I noticed something through the night vision camera that made my blood run cold. Their faces had changed. The blank, vacant expressions they had worn throughout the evening had been replaced by something else. Not quite alertness, but a kind of focused intensity that suggested they were now aware of their surroundings in a way they hadn't been before. And they were looking directly at our hiding position. "Williams," I whispered urgently, "I think they know we're here." The 6 naked figures had stopped at the edge of the clearing and were staring in our direction. Even through the night vision camera, I could see that their eyes were focused on the exact location where we were hidden. Then, in perfect unison, they began walking toward us. "We need to move," Williams said, already backing away from our position. "Now." We retreated through the forest as quietly as possible, using our knowledge of the trails we had followed to navigate back toward our vehicles. Behind us, I could hear the sound of 6 sets of bare feet moving through the underbrush, following our path with an accuracy that should have been impossible in the dark forest. By the time we reached our patrol cars, the sounds of pursuit had stopped. We waited in our vehicles for 30 minutes, watching the tree line for any sign of the 6 individuals, but they never emerged from the forest. "We need to call this in to the sheriff," Williams said as we prepared to leave the area. "This is beyond anything we're equipped to handle on our own." As I drove back to the station, I reviewed the night vision footage we had captured. The evidence was clear and disturbing. 6 local residents engaging in ritualistic behavior in multiple forest locations. Behavior that seemed to fundamentally alter their awareness and capabilities. But what we had witnessed raised more questions than it answered. Who was directing these rituals? How long had they been going on? And most importantly, what was happening to the people who participated in them? The investigation into the forest rituals was about to take a turn that would challenge everything I thought I understood about human behavior and the nature of reality itself. Sheriff Murphy assembled a team of investigators the next morning to review the night vision footage and plan a comprehensive response to what we had discovered in the forest. The video evidence was undeniable. 6 local residents engaging in coordinated ritual behavior that defied normal explanation. I've never seen anything like this in 30 years of law enforcement, Sheriff Murphy said as we reviewed the footage. These people appeared to be participating in some kind of organized cult activity, but there's no evidence of coercion or obvious mental impairment. Officer Williams and I provided detailed reports of our observations, including the multiple clearing sites, the carved symbols on trees, and the disturbing change in the participants' behavior after they completed their rituals. The most concerning aspect is their apparent awareness of our surveillance, I reported. At the end of the night, they seemed to know exactly where we were positioned, despite our efforts to remain hidden. Could be coincidence, suggested Deputy Rodriguez. Or they might have heard you moving through the forest. Possible, but their reaction was too coordinated. 6 people simultaneously turning to look at our exact location doesn't happen by accident. Sheriff Murphy decided to bring in additional resources for the investigation. He contacted the Vermont State Police and requested assistance from their Criminal Investigation Division, as well as consultation with experts in cult and ritual behavior. While we waited for additional support to arrive, I decided to investigate the backgrounds of the 6 individuals we had identified from the night vision footage. All were local residents with no history of mental illness, criminal activity, or involvement in unusual religious or spiritual practices. Linda Martinez was a bank teller who had worked at the same institution for 12 years. Her supervisor described her as reliable and professional, with no signs of personal problems or unusual behavior during work hours. David Thompson was a mechanic who owned his own automotive repair shop. His customers and employees reported that he had been performing his job competently and showed no signs of personality changes or erratic behavior. The other 4 participants, a teacher, a nurse, a retail manager, and a retiree, all had similar profiles. They were ordinary community members with stable employment, family relationships, and social connections. There was no obvious factor that connected them beyond their participation in the forest rituals. These aren't people on the margins of society, Officer Williams observed as we reviewed their backgrounds. They're established community members with responsibilities and relationships. What could motivate them to participate in this kind of behavior? The arrival of Vermont State Police investigator Sergeant Patricia Foster brought additional expertise to our investigation. Foster specialized in cult and occult-related crimes and had investigated similar cases in other parts of the state. The ritual behavior you've documented is consistent with certain forms of nature-based spirituality or neo-pagan practices, Foster explained after reviewing our evidence. But the level of coordination and the apparent unconscious state of the participants suggests something more organized and potentially more dangerous. Could this be connected to drug use? Sheriff Murphy asked. Possible, but the sustained nature of their activities and their ability to navigate difficult terrain suggests they weren't impaired by conventional drugs. There are some psychoactive substances that can produce trance-like states while maintaining physical coordination, but they're not commonly available or easy to administer to multiple people simultaneously. Foster recommended conducting discreet interviews with family members and close associates of the identified participants to determine if they had noticed any changes in behavior or new interests that might explain their involvement in the forest rituals. The interviews yielded disturbing information. In every case, family members reported that the participants had been attending community meetings or discussion groups over the past several months. The meetings were described as focusing on stress reduction, meditation, and connection with nature. Linda started going to these wellness meetings about 6 months ago, reported Martinez's sister during her interview. She said they were helping her deal with work stress and improve her mental health. She seemed happier and more relaxed after she started attending. Did she mention who was leading these meetings or where they were held? She said it was a group that met in different locations around town, sometimes at the library, sometimes at people's homes. She was always vague about the details, but she said the leader was very knowledgeable about natural healing and spiritual wellness. Similar reports came from family members of all 6 participants. Each had become involved in wellness or meditation groups that promised stress relief and spiritual growth through connection with nature and traditional practices. We need to identify who's leading these groups, Foster said after reviewing the interview results. Someone is systematically recruiting local residents and conditioning them for participation in these forest rituals. The breakthrough came when we interviewed the wife of David Thompson, the mechanic. She had been concerned about her husband's involvement in the wellness groups and had tried to attend one of the meetings herself. "I went to a meeting at the community center last month," Mrs. Thompson reported. The leader was a woman who said she was a spiritual counselor and healer. She talked about reconnecting with natural energies and ancient wisdom. It seemed harmless enough, but something about the way she spoke made me uncomfortable. "Can you describe this woman?" She was probably in her 40s, with long dark hair. She dressed in natural fabrics and spoke very softly. She said her name was Sarah, but I don't think that was her real name. She seemed to know a lot about each person who attended the meetings, like she had been studying them. "Did you attend any other meetings?" "No, and I tried to discourage David from going, but he said the meetings were helping him feel more centered and peaceful. He became defensive when I questioned them, which wasn't like him at all." Based on Mrs. Thompson's description, we began searching for a woman matching the profile who had recently moved to the area, or who might be operating under an assumed identity. The investigation led us to a property rental about 10 miles outside town that had been leased 6 months earlier by someone using the name Sarah Mitchell. When we arrived at the property to conduct a welfare check, we found it had been abandoned. The house was empty, except for materials that suggested it had been used for group meetings. Folding chairs arranged in circles, books on meditation and spiritual practices, and handwritten notes that appeared to be meeting agendas. But in a back bedroom, we found something that elevated the investigation to a new level of concern. The room contained detailed files on more than 30 local residents, including photographs, personal information, psychological profiles, and notes about their vulnerabilities and potential for recruitment. The files were organized like a military intelligence operation, with careful documentation of each person's background, family situation, and susceptibility to influence. "This is systematic psychological manipulation," Foster observed as we reviewed the files. "Whoever Sarah Mitchell really is, she's been conducting surveillance on community members and selecting targets for recruitment based on specific criteria." The files revealed that Sarah Mitchell had been studying the community for at least a year before beginning her recruitment activities. She had identified people who were dealing with stress, depression, relationship problems, or other life challenges that made them vulnerable to promises of spiritual healing and personal transformation. Most disturbing was the discovery that the 6 individuals we had observed in the forest were listed in the files as Phase 1 subjects. There were additional files for Phase 2 subjects and Phase 3 subjects, suggesting that Sarah Mitchell's operation was designed to expand over time. "We need to find this woman immediately," Sheriff Murphy decided. "If she's planning to expand her recruitment, we could be looking at a much larger problem." But Sarah Mitchell had vanished as completely as if she had never existed. The rental property provided no leads to her current location, and the identity she had used to lease the house was traced to fraudulent documentation. As we continued our investigation, the forest rituals continued on their regular schedule. Despite increased police surveillance, we were unable to prevent the participants from making their way to the forest clearings, or to understand how they were receiving instructions about when and where to gather. "It's like they're operating on autopilot," Williams observed after another night of surveillance. "They seem to know when to gather and where to go without any visible communication or coordination." The investigation was about to take a turn that would challenge our understanding of human consciousness and the boundaries between reality and nightmare. 2 weeks into our investigation, we discovered that the forest rituals were part of a much larger pattern of unusual activity throughout Millfield County. Reports began coming in from other areas of people behaving strangely, gathering in remote locations, and engaging in coordinated activities that defied conventional explanation. A farmer in the eastern part of the county reported finding crop circles in his fields, not the simple circular patterns sometimes attributed to natural phenomena, but complex geometric designs that appeared to have been created by people walking in precise formations. Security cameras on his property showed groups of people moving through his fields at night, creating the patterns through carefully coordinated movement. A park ranger reported that hiking trails in the state forest were being modified without authorization. New paths were being created that connected previously isolated areas, and existing trails were being marked with symbols similar to those we had found carved on trees near the ritual clearings. Most disturbing was a report from the county's emergency medical services. Paramedics had responded to several calls involving people found wandering in remote areas, disoriented and unable to remember how they had gotten there. All of the individuals were local residents with no history of mental illness or memory problems. "We're seeing a systematic alteration of the local environment and human behavior," Sergeant Foster observed as we reviewed the accumulating reports. "Someone is implementing a large-scale operation designed to modify both the physical landscape and the psychological state of the population." The medical reports from the disoriented individuals provided crucial clues about what was happening. Blood tests revealed traces of plant-based compounds that had psychoactive properties, but weren't commonly found in the local environment. The compounds were consistent with substances used in certain traditional rituals to induce altered states of consciousness. "Someone is administering psychoactive substances to community members without their knowledge," Dr. Patricia Williams from the county hospital reported. "The compounds we've identified can cause temporary memory loss, increased suggestibility, and trance-like states while allowing people to maintain basic motor functions." How would these substances be administered? They could be introduced through food or drink at community gatherings, or through aerosol delivery in enclosed spaces. The compounds are absorbed quickly and metabolized within 24 to 48 hours, making them difficult to detect unless you know what to look for. This information explained how Sarah Mitchell had been able to recruit and control participants in the forest rituals. She had been systematically drugging community members at her wellness meetings, making them more susceptible to psychological manipulation and programming them to participate in coordinated activities. But the scope of the operation suggested that Sarah Mitchell was not working alone. The modification of hiking trails, the creation of crop circle patterns, and the coordination of activities across multiple locations required resources and manpower beyond what a single individual could provide. "We need to expand our investigation beyond the local level," Sheriff Murphy decided. This appears to be part of a larger organization with significant resources and sophisticated planning capabilities. The Vermont State Police contacted federal agencies to investigate potential connections to other unusual activities in the region. What they discovered was both alarming and enlightening. Similar patterns of coordinated, unusual behavior had been reported in rural communities throughout New England over the past 2 years. In each case, a charismatic individual had appeared in the community, established wellness or spiritual groups, and gradually recruited local residents for participation in mysterious nighttime activities. The Federal Bureau of Investigation had been tracking these incidents as part of a larger investigation into what they termed organized psychological manipulation operations. Agent Michael Foster from the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit was assigned to coordinate with our local investigation. What you're dealing with in Millfield County is part of a coordinated network that's been operating across multiple states, Agent Foster explained during his briefing with our team. We've identified at least 12 communities where similar operations have been established, each following the same general pattern. What's the ultimate objective of these operations? Sheriff Murphy asked. We're still trying to determine that. In some communities, the activities stopped after several months with no apparent long-term effects. In others, participants have disappeared entirely, leaving behind no trace of where they went or what happened to them. The FBI's investigation had revealed that the network was highly sophisticated, with extensive resources and advanced knowledge of psychological manipulation techniques. The individuals leading the operations in different communities were using false identities but appeared to be trained professionals with backgrounds in psychology, medicine, or military intelligence. Sarah Mitchell is almost certainly not her real name, Agent Foster reported. We've identified similar individuals operating under different identities in other affected communities. They appear to be part of a coordinated effort to test various forms of population control and behavioral modification. Population control for what purpose? That's what we're trying to determine. The operations might be experimental programs, testing techniques for mass influence and control, or they could be preliminary phases of a larger plan that we haven't identified yet. While the federal investigation continued, we maintained our surveillance of the forest rituals and tried to understand the immediate threat to our community. The number of participants had grown from 6 to 12, and new individuals were being recruited regularly through the ongoing wellness meetings. The night vision footage showed that the rituals themselves were becoming more complex and elaborate. Additional clearing sites had been established, and the participants were spending longer periods engaged in coordinated activities that resembled military exercises as much as spiritual practices. They're being trained for something, Officer Williams observed as we reviewed the latest surveillance footage. The level of coordination and precision in their movement suggests they're practicing specific procedures, but trained for what remained a mystery. The participants continued to function normally in their daily lives, showing no outward signs of the dramatic behavioral changes they exhibited during the nighttime rituals. The breakthrough in our understanding came from an unexpected source. One of the participants, Linda Martinez, the bank teller, failed to appear for work one morning. When her supervisor called to check on her welfare, there was no answer at her home. A welfare check revealed that Martinez had simply vanished. Her house showed no signs of struggle or forced entry, but personal belongings, including her purse, keys, and cell phone, were left behind. It was as if she had simply walked out of her house and disappeared. This is the pattern we've seen in other communities, Agent Foster reported when we contacted him about Martinez's disappearance. After several months of ritual activity, participants begin disappearing permanently. They don't return home, and no trace of them is ever found. Where do they go? We don't know. In previous cases, Missing participants have never been located despite extensive searches. It's as if they ceased to exist entirely. The disappearance of Linda Martinez prompted Sheriff Murphy to authorize more aggressive intervention. We decided to attempt direct contact with the remaining participants to warn them about the potential danger they were facing. But when we approached David Thompson at his automotive shop, his response was deeply disturbing. "I appreciate your concern, Officer Patterson," Thompson said when I explained our investigation and Martinez's disappearance. "But Linda hasn't disappeared. She's moved on to the next phase of her development." "What do you mean by the next phase?" "Sarah has been teaching us about different levels of consciousness and existence. Linda was ready to progress beyond the limitations of ordinary life. She's exploring new possibilities now. David, Linda is missing. Her family is worried about her. Don't you think she should have told them where she was going?" Thompson's expression remained calm and serene, but there was something unsettling about his eyes. They had the same vacant quality I had observed during the forest rituals, as if he wasn't entirely present in the conversation. "Officer Patterson, you're operating from a limited understanding of reality. Linda is fine. She's exactly where she needs to be, and soon others will join her in exploring these new possibilities." "Where is she, David? Where did Linda go?" "She's in a place beyond ordinary perception. Sarah calls it the expanded realm. It's a state of existence that transcends physical limitations." The conversation with Thompson confirmed our worst fears. The participants weren't just engaging in unusual ritual behavior, they were being prepared for something that involved permanent departure from their normal lives. "We need to shut this down immediately," Sheriff Murphy decided after I reported my conversation with Thompson. "These people are being manipulated into disappearing permanently, and we have no idea what's actually happening to them." But our efforts to locate Sarah Mitchell and stop the recruitment of new participants proved futile. The wellness meetings had stopped, but the forest rituals continued on schedule. The participants seemed to be operating according to programming they had already received, continuing their activities without any visible leadership or coordination. "It's like a program that continues running even after the programmer has left," Agent Foster observed. "These people have been conditioned to continue their activities independently until they reach whatever endpoint has been programmed into them." 3 days after Linda Martinez disappeared, David Thompson also vanished. Like Martinez, he left no trace of where he had gone, abandoning his business and personal belongings without explanation. Over the following week, the remaining 10 participants began disappearing one by one. Each disappearance followed the same pattern. The individual simply failed to appear for work or family obligations, with no note or communication about their intentions. "We're losing the entire group," Williams reported as we tracked the disappearances. "At this rate, all 12 participants will be gone within the next week." But understanding where they were going or what was happening to them remained beyond our reach. Despite extensive searches of the forest and surrounding areas, we found no trace of the missing individuals. The investigation was about to reveal a truth more disturbing than any of us had imagined. On the night when the last 3 participants were scheduled to disappear, Officer Williams and I made the decision to follow them directly, despite the risks involved. We equipped ourselves with tracking devices and night vision equipment, determined to discover what was actually happening to the missing community members. The 3 remaining participants, the teacher, the nurse, and the retail manager, gathered at the first forest clearing at exactly 2 a.m. They performed the same ritual we had observed multiple times, but this time their behavior was different. There was a finality to their movements, a sense that they were completing something rather than simply practicing. After completing their ritual at the first clearing, they moved to the second location, then to the third. but instead of returning home as they had done previously, they continued deeper into the forest along a trail that Williams and I had never seen them use before. "They're going somewhere new," I whispered into my radio as we followed at a distance. "This isn't part of their usual pattern." The trail led deeper into the forest than we had ever ventured, winding through increasingly dense woodland until we reached an area that seemed untouched by human activity. The trees were older and larger here, creating a canopy so thick that even moonlight couldn't penetrate to the forest floor. After nearly 2 miles of hiking, the trail opened into a massive clearing that dwarfed the ritual sites we had discovered earlier. This clearing was roughly the size of a football field, surrounded by ancient trees that appeared to be hundreds of years old. In the center of the clearing was a structure that defied immediate explanation. It appeared to be constructed of stone and wood, but its architecture was unlike anything I had seen before. The structure was roughly circular, perhaps 50 feet in diameter, with walls that curved inward toward a central opening. "What is that thing?" Williams whispered as we observed from the edge of the clearing. "I don't know, but it doesn't look like any building technique I've ever seen." The 3 participants approached the structure with the same purposeful coordination they had shown throughout their forest activities. They walked directly to the central opening and, without hesitation, disappeared inside. Williams and I waited for them to emerge, but after 30 minutes, there was no sign of movement from within the structure. The clearing was completely silent, with no sounds coming from inside the building. "We need to investigate," I decided. "If those people are in danger, we have to help them." We approached the structure carefully, using our night vision equipment to scan for any signs of activity or danger. Up close, the building was even more mysterious. The stones appeared to be fitted together without mortar, and the wood seemed to be naturally curved rather than cut into shape. The central opening led to a ramp that descended underground. There was no artificial lighting, but a faint glow seemed to be coming from somewhere deeper within the structure. "This goes underground," Williams observed as we examined the entrance. "That explains why we never found the missing people. They're below ground level." We descended the ramp slowly, our flashlights providing additional illumination beyond the strange glow that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. The ramp led to a circular chamber approximately the same size as the structure above ground. What we found in that chamber would haunt both of us for the rest of our lives. The room contained approximately 30 people, all sitting in meditative positions arranged in concentric circles around a central area. All were naked, and all appeared to be in the same trance-like state we had observed during the forest rituals. But what made the scene truly horrifying was their condition. The people in the chamber appeared to be in various stages of starvation and dehydration. Some looked like they had been there for weeks, their bodies showing severe signs of malnutrition and neglect. "Jesus Christ," Williams whispered. "How long have they been down here?" I recognized several faces among the seated figures, community members who had been reported missing over the past several months, including Linda Martinez and David Thompson. They were alive, but appeared to be completely unaware of their surroundings or their physical condition. In the center of the circular arrangement was a pool of water that seemed to be the source of the strange glow illuminating the chamber. The water moved with patterns that didn't seem natural, creating shifting lights that reflected off the chamber walls. "We need to get medical help down here immediately," I radioed to dispatch. "We have approximately 30 people in severe medical distress in an underground chamber." But as I spoke, something extraordinary happened. The 3 participants who had entered the chamber ahead of us began to move. In perfect unison, they stood up and walked toward the central pool. Without hesitation, they stepped into the glowing water and began to wade toward the center of the pool. As they moved deeper, their bodies began to change in ways that defied logical explanation. Their skin took on the same luminescent quality as the water, and their movements became fluid and graceful in a way that seemed impossible for human beings. They appeared to be transforming into something that was no longer entirely human. "What's happening to them?" Williams asked, her voice filled with terror. "I don't know, but we need to get them out of there." I stepped toward the pool, intending to pull the 3 people back to safety, but Williams grabbed my arm. "Look around the chamber," she said urgently. "Look at the others." I turned to examine the seated figures more carefully and realized something that made my blood run cold. Many of them showed signs of the same luminescent transformation we were witnessing in the pool. Their skin had a faint glow, and their features seemed to be changing in subtle but unmistakable ways. "They're not starving," Williams realized. "They're changing into something else." The chamber contained not victims of starvation and neglect, but people undergoing some kind of fundamental transformation. The ritual activities in the forest had been preparation for this final stage, where participants underwent a change that altered their basic nature. "We need to leave," I said, backing toward the ramp. "Now." But as we turned to flee, we found our path blocked. Sarah Mitchell stood at the entrance to the chamber, no longer disguised as a wellness counselor but revealed as something far more dangerous. "Officers Patterson and Williams," she said in a voice that carried unnatural authority. "I was wondering when you would find your way here." Up close, Sarah Mitchell's appearance was as unsettling as the transformation we had witnessed in the pool. Her skin had the same luminescent quality, and her eyes reflected light in a way that suggested they had fundamentally changed structure. "What have you done to these people?" I demanded, though I kept my hand on my service weapon. "I've given them the opportunity to evolve beyond the limitations of ordinary human existence," she replied calmly. "They've chosen to transcend their previous forms and explore new possibilities of consciousness and being. They're dying down here. They're being reborn. The process requires time and patience, but the results are worth any temporary discomfort." Williams tried to push past Sarah to reach the ramp, but found her way blocked by an invisible force that seemed to emanate from the transformed woman. "You can't leave until you understand what you've witnessed," Sarah said. "This chamber is a threshold between different forms of existence. Those who enter willingly can cross to a new state of being." "Let us go," I said, drawing my weapon. "We're police officers investigating missing persons." "Your weapons are useless here," Sarah replied. "This place operates according to different rules than the world above." To demonstrate her point, she gestured toward my service weapon. The metal became too hot to hold, forcing me to drop it before it burned my hand. "The choice is simple," Sarah continued. "You can join the others in transformation, or you can remain trapped here as witnesses to something your limited understanding can't comprehend." Williams and I realized we were facing something beyond conventional law enforcement capabilities. The underground chamber, the transformation of the missing people, and Sarah Mitchell's supernatural abilities suggested we had stumbled into a situation that defied normal reality. But what happened next would prove that even in the face of the impossible, human determination and courage could still make a difference. The standoff in the underground chamber lasted for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Sarah Mitchell stood between us and the exit, her transformed appearance becoming more pronounced as time passed. The luminescent quality of her skin was spreading, and her features were shifting in ways that made her appear less human with each passing moment. "The transformation is accelerating," she said, though whether she was talking to us or to herself wasn't clear. "The chamber's energy is responding to the presence of new consciousness." Around us, the 30 seated figures began to show signs of increased activity. Their own luminescent transformation was progressing more rapidly, and some were beginning to move and shift position despite appearing to be in deep meditation. "Williams," I whispered, "when I create a distraction, run for the ramp." But before I could implement any plan, help arrived from an unexpected source. Agent Foster and a team of federal agents appeared at the chamber entrance, equipped with specialized equipment I didn't recognize. "Sarah Mitchell, or whatever your real name is, step away from the officers," Agent Foster commanded, his voice amplified by some kind of electronic device. Sarah turned toward the federal agents, and for the first time since we had encountered her, she showed signs of surprise and concern. "You don't understand what you're interfering with," she said, her voice now carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate throughout the chamber. "This is evolution in progress. You're trying to stop the natural advancement of human consciousness." "We understand exactly what you're doing," Agent Foster replied, "and we're here to stop it." The federal agents were equipped with devices that appeared to be designed specifically for this situation. They deployed equipment that generated high-frequency sounds and intense white light, both of which seemed to disrupt whatever forces were operating in the chamber. The effect on Sarah and the transformed individuals was immediate and dramatic. The luminescent quality of their skin began to fade, and their altered features started to revert toward more human appearances. "You're damaging years of careful work," Sarah protested, but her voice was becoming weaker and more human-sounding. "Move," Agent Foster shouted to Williams and me. "The disruption field won't last long." We ran toward the ramp as the federal agents continued to deploy their specialized equipment. Behind us, the chamber filled with confused voices as the 30 seated individuals began to wake up from their trance-like state. As we reached the surface, Williams and I could hear Sarah Mitchell screaming in rage and frustration. But the sound was becoming more distant, as if she were moving away from us or fading into some other dimension. "What the hell was that place?" Williams asked as we reached the safety of the clearing above ground. "A transformation chamber," Agent Foster explained as he joined us at the surface. "Part of an experimental program designed to alter human consciousness and physiology. We've been tracking these operations for 3 years. How did you know where to find us?" "We've been monitoring your investigation and had teams positioned throughout the forest. When you went underground, we activated emergency protocols. Emergency medical teams were already arriving to assist the people who were being brought up from the chamber. Most appeared to be severely disoriented, but were returning to normal human appearance as they were removed from the chamber's influence." "Will they be all right?" I asked as I watched paramedics attending to Linda Martinez and David Thompson. "Physically, they should recover completely," Agent Foster said. "Psychologically, it will take time. They've been subjected to intensive conditioning and chemical manipulation over several months." "What about Sarah Mitchell?" "She's gone. The disruption field forced her to retreat, probably to whatever dimension or reality she originally came from. These operations are conducted by entities that exist partially outside normal space and time. The federal agents spent the next several hours documenting the underground chamber and removing equipment that appeared to be of non-human origin. The chamber itself was sealed with concrete after everything valuable for investigation had been removed. This is classified at the highest levels, Agent Foster informed Williams and me as the operation concluded. What you witnessed tonight involves technologies and entities that are not acknowledged to exist by any government agency. Are there other operations like this? More than you'd want to know. This particular network has been attempting to establish transformation sites in rural communities across North America for the past decade. You helped us shut down one of their most successful operations. The official report of the incident described it as the breakup of a cult operation that had been using drugs and psychological manipulation to control local residents. No mention was made of the transformation chamber, the luminescent beings, or the non-human technology that had been involved. Linda Martinez, David Thompson, and the other community members who had been rescued from the chamber gradually recovered their normal lives, though most retained no clear memories of their experiences. They remembered attending wellness meetings and feeling more peaceful and connected to nature. But the details of their forest activities and time in the transformation chamber remained blocked. "It's probably better that they don't remember," Dr. Patricia Williams from the county hospital observed. "The human mind isn't designed to process that kind of reality alteration." 6 months after the incident in the forest, life in Millfield County had returned to what most people considered normal. The community members who had been involved in Sarah Mitchell's operation showed no lasting effects from their experience, and the official investigation was closed with findings that described a cult leader who had fled when her activities were discovered. But for those of us who had witnessed what really happened in the underground chamber, normal was a concept that had been permanently altered. Officer Williams requested a transfer to a desk job in the county administrative offices, saying she no longer felt comfortable with the uncertainties of patrol work. "There are things out there that we're not equipped to handle," she told me during her last week on patrol duty. "Things that our training and procedures don't prepare us for." I remained on patrol, but my perspective on law enforcement had fundamentally changed. Every unusual call, every strange report from the public, carried the possibility that it might be connected to forces beyond normal human experience. Agent Foster had provided Williams and me with a secure communication method to report any unusual activities that might be related to the network of transformation operations. Over the following months, I used that communication channel more often than I had expected. Reports of people gathering in remote locations, unusual behavioral changes in community members, and modifications to natural landscapes all had to be evaluated for potential connections to entities like Sarah Mitchell. "The network is extensive and persistent," Agent Foster explained during one of our periodic briefings. "Shutting down one operation doesn't eliminate the threat. These entities will continue attempting to establish new transformation sites wherever they find suitable conditions." What are they ultimately trying to accomplish? "We believe they're conducting a long-term experiment in human evolution, attempting to create hybrid beings that combine human consciousness with their own advanced capabilities. The transformation chamber you discovered was one of their most successful attempts at permanent alteration of human physiology. The knowledge that such operations were ongoing throughout the region made every day of the patrol work feel like walking through a minefield. How many communities were being infiltrated by entities posing as helpful counselors or spiritual leaders? How many residents were being gradually conditioned for participation in transformation experiments? The challenge is that their methods are incredibly sophisticated, Agent Foster had warned. They study communities for months or years before beginning recruitment, identifying the psychological vulnerabilities and social dynamics that will allow them to gain influence without detection. The forest clearing where we had first observed the ritual activities remained under federal surveillance, though no further unusual activity was detected there. The underground chamber had been completely filled with concrete and sealed, but periodically I would receive reports from hikers or hunters who claimed to see strange lights in that area of the forest. "Some effects of their operations are permanent," Agent Foster explained when I reported these sightings. The transformation chamber altered the local environment in ways that may persist for years or decades. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the investigation was learning how common these operations were. Agent Foster's team was tracking similar activities in dozens of rural communities across North America, with new cases being identified regularly. "We're fighting a war that most people don't know exists," he had told me. "These entities are patient and methodical, willing to spend years establishing a single transformation site. They're planning something much larger than individual community operations." The residents of Millfield County who had been involved in the transformation experiment showed no interest in discussing their experiences, even when approached by family members or friends who were concerned about the gap in their memories. "It's like those months never existed for them," reported Dr. Williams during a follow-up evaluation of the affected individuals. "They've integrated back into their normal lives seamlessly, but there's definitely psychological conditioning that prevents them from accessing memories of their involvement in the operation." The conditioning also seemed to make them resistant to recruitment by similar operations in the future. Several months after the forest incident, reports came in of another charismatic individual attempting to establish wellness meetings in a neighboring county. None of the Millfield County residents who had been involved in Sarah Mitchell's operation showed any interest in the new meetings. "They may have been immunized against future manipulation," Agent Foster suggested. "The trauma of the transformation process might have created psychological defenses that prevent similar conditioning. But for every person who had been protected by their previous experience, there were dozens of potential new recruits who remained vulnerable to the sophisticated manipulation techniques used by the transformation network." The case changed how I approached every aspect of police work. Traffic stops, welfare checks, community meetings, all carried the possibility of encountering something that went beyond normal criminal activity into realms that challenged the basic assumptions about reality that most people lived by. The badge represents a commitment to protect people from threats they may not understand or believe in, I reflected during a training session with new officers who were unaware of the classified aspects of the forest investigation. The official report on the Millfield County incident became part of a growing database of similar cases that federal agencies used to track and predict the activities of the transformation network. But for the local residents who had been affected, the experience remained buried beneath layers of conditioning and selective memory loss. Standing at the memorial that had been erected for Linda Martinez and the other community members who had been missing during the investigation, I often wondered about the choices they had made during their time in the transformation chamber. Had they truly been willing participants in an evolutionary experiment, as Sarah Mitchell had claimed? Or had they been victims of sophisticated manipulation that had convinced them to surrender their humanity for promises of transcendence? The truth is probably somewhere between those extremes, Agent Foster had observed when I posed the question to him. These entities are skilled at identifying people who are genuinely seeking something beyond ordinary existence, and then exploiting that desire for their own purposes. The forest, where the transformation chamber had been located, remained off limits to the public, officially due to environmental protection concerns, but actually because of the ongoing surveillance and the potential for residual effects from the transformation technology. Sometimes, during my night patrols, I would drive past the access roads to that area and remember the night when Williams and I had followed the runners deeper into the woods than any law enforcement officers should have to go. The experience had taught me that the thin blue line that separates order from chaos is thinner than most people realize, and that sometimes protecting the public requires confronting threats that exist beyond the boundaries of normal human experience. The call came in at 11:43 p.m. on a sweltering September night in Bakersfield, when the temperature still hadn't dropped below 90 degrees, despite the sun having set hours ago. I had been working the night shift for the Kern County Sheriff's Department for 6 years, and September was always the worst time of year for patrol work. The heat made people irritable and unpredictable, leading to more domestic disputes, bar fights, and general mayhem than any other month. But this call was different from the usual complaints we received during the hot season. Unit 19, we have a citizen complaint about disturbing noises coming from the old Riverside Manufacturing Building on Industrial Boulevard. Dispatch crackled through my radio. Caller reports hearing what sounds like machinery running and people talking inside the building, which has been abandoned for over 2 years. I grabbed the radio, already turning my patrol car toward the industrial district on the east side of town. Unit 19, responding, "Can you get more details from the caller about the nature of the sounds?" Caller is Margaret Sullivan, lives in the apartment complex across the street from the building. She says the sounds have been going on for 3 nights straight, always starting around midnight and continuing until dawn. She tried calling the building's management company, but they insisted the building is completely vacant and secured. The Riverside Manufacturing Building was familiar to every officer in Kern County. The massive concrete structure had been built in the 1960s to house a textile operation that employed nearly 1,000 people during its peak years. When the company moved its operations overseas in 2019, the building had been abandoned, leaving behind a hulking reminder of Bakersfield's industrial past. The building sat on a 5-acre lot surrounded by chain-link fencing topped with razor wire. According to city records, it had been purchased by a development company that planned to convert it into a mixed-use retail and residential complex, but the project had stalled due to financing issues and environmental concerns about contamination from decades of industrial use. As I drove through the industrial district, I passed the familiar landscape of warehouses, freight yards, and abandoned lots that characterized this part of Bakersfield. Most of the buildings were dark at this hour, with only the occasional security light breaking the monotony of concrete and steel silhouettes against the night sky. The Riverside Manufacturing Building dominated the landscape even in darkness. The structure was 6 stories tall and covered nearly an entire city block, with rows of broken windows staring down like dead eyes. The parking lot that had once accommodated hundreds of workers' cars was now cracked and overgrown with weeds, littered with debris and graffiti. I pulled into the apartment complex across the street where Margaret Sullivan lived and parked, where I could observe the abandoned building while waiting for her to meet me in the parking lot. From this vantage point, the building looked exactly as I expected: dark, empty, and showing every sign of prolonged abandonment. Margaret Sullivan emerged from the apartment building within minutes of my arrival. She was a woman in her late 60s, wearing a bathrobe and slippers, with an expression of exhaustion and frustration that suggested she hadn't been sleeping well. "Officer Morrison," she said as she approached my patrol car, "thank you for coming out. I know this probably sounds crazy, but there's definitely something going on in that building. Mrs. Sullivan, can you describe exactly what you've been hearing? It sounds like machinery running, not just one machine, but multiple pieces of equipment operating at the same time. And voices, definitely human voices, like people working and talking to each other. Sometimes I can hear what sounds like metal being moved around, heavy objects being dragged across floors." I looked across the street at the dark building. "What time do these sounds typically start?" "Always around midnight, and they continue until 5 or 6 in the morning. The first night I heard it, I thought maybe it was construction work or some kind of maintenance, but when I called the management company, they said no work was scheduled and the building is supposed to be completely empty. Have you seen any lights in the building or vehicles in the parking lot?" "That's the strange part. There are never any lights visible from the outside, and I've never seen any cars or trucks, but the sounds are definitely coming from inside the building. My bedroom window faces the building directly, and on quiet nights I can hear it clearly." I decided to investigate the building directly to see if there were any obvious signs of unauthorized activity. Mrs. Sullivan, I'm going to check the perimeter of the building. If you see or hear anything unusual while I'm over there, call 911 immediately." The chain-link fence surrounding the building appeared to be intact, with no obvious signs of forced entry. The main gate was secured with a heavy chain and padlock that showed no signs of tampering. I walked the perimeter of the fence, using my flashlight to check for holes or damaged sections that might allow access to the property. As I circled the building, I noticed something that immediately caught my attention. While the exterior of the building was dark, there were faint sounds coming from inside. Not the mechanical noises Mrs. Sullivan had described, but something more subtle. It sounded like air moving through ventilation systems which shouldn't have been operating in an abandoned building. I radioed dispatch to request information about the building's utilities. Unit 19 to dispatch. Can you check with utility companies about the service status to the Riverside Manufacturing Building? I'm hearing sounds that suggest HVAC systems might be operating. Copy that, Unit 19. Stand by for utility information. While waiting for the utility information, I continued my examination of the building's exterior. The loading docks on the east side of the building showed signs of recent activity. Tire marks in the dust and concrete, and one of the large overhead doors appeared to have been opened recently, based on the cleaner appearance of its tracks compared to the others. Unit 19, dispatch here. Pacific Gas and Electric shows electrical service to the building was terminated in January 2020. No active service accounts for that address. This information made the situation more concerning. If the building had no electrical service, there should be no powered equipment operating inside. Yet I could clearly hear mechanical sounds that suggested electrical systems were running. I decided to contact the building's management company directly to get more information about the property's status and any authorized activities that might be taking place. The emergency contact number for Riverside Development Corporation connected me to an answering service, but they were able to patch me through to the on-call manager, Robert Martinez, who seemed surprised to receive a call about the building. "Officer Morrison, I can assure you that there's no authorized activity at that building," Martinez said. "We have security checks twice a week, and the building has been completely vacant since we took possession. There shouldn't be anyone inside, and there's definitely no electrical service." "Mr. Martinez, when was the last security check?" "Our security company, Guardian Services, checked the building 3 days ago. They reported everything secure with no signs of unauthorized entry. I'm going to need access to the building to investigate reports of suspicious activity. Can you meet me at the property, or can you authorize entry?" "I can be there in 30 minutes, Officer Morrison. This is very concerning if someone has managed to get inside the building without our knowledge." While waiting for Martinez to arrive, I returned to the fence perimeter to conduct a more thorough examination. This time, I found what I had missed during my initial survey: a section of fence on the building's north side, where several links had been cut and carefully bent back to create an opening large enough for a person to crawl through. The opening was concealed behind overgrown vegetation and positioned where it wouldn't be visible from the street or from most of the surrounding buildings. Someone had taken considerable care to create covert access to the property. I radioed for backup before proceeding further. Unit 19 to dispatch, I found evidence of unauthorized access to the abandoned building. Request backup unit for building search. Copy that. Unit 19. Unit 7 is en route to your location. As I waited for backup, I positioned myself where I could observe both the concealed entrance I had discovered and the main building. From this position, I could hear the mechanical sounds more clearly. Definitely the hum of electrical equipment and what sounded like ventilation systems operating. But there was something else too. Underlying the mechanical sounds was something that made my skin crawl. A rhythmic tapping or knocking that seemed to be coming from multiple locations within the building simultaneously. Officer Lisa Rodriguez arrived as backup just as Robert Martinez pulled into the parking lot in a silver sedan. Rodriguez was a 10-year veteran with experience in building searches and tactical operations, someone I trusted to handle unusual situations professionally. "What's the situation, Morrison?" Rodriguez asked as she joined me at the fence line. "Citizen complaint about sounds coming from an abandoned building that's supposed to have no electrical service. I've found evidence of covert access and can confirm there are mechanical sounds coming from inside the building." Martinez approached us carrying a large ring of keys and a tablet computer. "Officers, I have the master keys and building plans if you need them. I'm very concerned about how someone could have gotten inside without triggering our security systems." "Mr. Martinez, what kind of security systems does the building have?" "Motion sensors in the main lobby and stairwells, cameras at the main entrances, and magnetic sensors on all doors and windows. The security company monitors everything 24/7. "Have there been any alarms or alerts in the past week?" "No, nothing." That's what makes this so puzzling. If someone is inside the building, they would have had to bypass multiple security systems without detection. As we prepared to enter the building, the sounds from inside became more pronounced. The mechanical humming was joined by what clearly sounded like human voices. Not individual conversations, but multiple people talking simultaneously, creating a murmur of activity that suggested significant numbers of people inside the building. "How many people do you think could be in there?" Rodriguez asked as we approached the main entrance. "Based on the sounds, it could be dozens," I replied. "But there's something strange about the voices. They don't sound like normal conversation." Martinez unlocked the main entrance, and we stepped into the building's lobby. Immediately, we were hit by a wave of stale, humid air that carried an odd chemical smell. Not industrial chemicals, but something organic and unsettling. The lobby was exactly what you'd expect from an abandoned building. Dust-covered furniture, yellowed papers scattered on the floor, and the general atmosphere of decay that comes with prolonged vacancy. But the sounds we had heard from outside were much louder here, clearly coming from the upper floors. "The elevators haven't worked since the power was cut," Martinez said. "We'll need to use the stairwells." As we began climbing the stairs to the second floor, the sounds became more distinct and more disturbing. The voices were clearer now, and what I heard made no sense. It sounded like dozens of people speaking in unison, reciting something in a rhythmic cadence that resembled a chant or prayer. "Rodriguez, are you hearing this?" I whispered as we reached the second-floor landing. "Yeah, and I don't like it. This isn't just trespassing. This sounds like some kind of organized group activity." The second floor was where the investigation would take a turn that none of us were prepared for. The second floor of the Riverside Manufacturing Building had been designed as office space during the building's operational years, with a maze of cubicles and conference rooms that had once housed the company's administrative operations. But as we emerged from the stairwell, flashlights cutting through the darkness, we found ourselves in an environment that had been completely transformed. The cubicle walls had been removed, creating a vast open space that stretched across the entire floor. But the space wasn't empty. It was filled with what appeared to be workstations, each equipped with electronic equipment that glowed with LED displays and indicator lights. "How is this equipment powered?" Rodriguez whispered, echoing the question that had immediately occurred to me. Martinez stared at the scene in disbelief. "This is impossible. There's no electrical service to this building. I've been managing this property for 2 years, and this equipment was definitely not here 3 days ago." The workstations were arranged in precise rows, each consisting of a desk, multiple computer monitors, and various electronic devices that I couldn't immediately identify. Cables ran between the workstations, creating a network that suggested the equipment was designed to work together as an integrated system. But most disturbing was the fact that every workstation appeared to be occupied. Figures sat at each desk, hunched over keyboards, and staring at computer screens with an intensity that bordered on obsessive. They appeared to be so focused on their work that they hadn't noticed our arrival, despite the beams of our flashlights and our whispered conversation. "There must be 60 or 70 people in here," Rodriguez observed quietly. "How did they get all this equipment inside without anyone noticing?" I decided to approach one of the workstations to attempt communication with whoever was operating it. As I got closer, I could see that the person at the nearest desk was a middle-aged man wearing clothing that looked like it hadn't been changed in days. His hair was unkempt, and his skin had an unhealthy pallor that suggested he hadn't seen sunlight recently. "Excuse me," I said, speaking loudly enough to get his attention. "Kern, County Sheriff's Department. I need to speak with you." The man didn't respond or acknowledge my presence in any way. He continued typing on his keyboard and staring at his computer screen as if I wasn't there. I moved closer and tapped him on the shoulder. "Sir, I'm a police officer. I need you to stop what you're doing and talk to me." Still no response. The man's eyes remained fixed on his computer screen, and his fingers continued moving across the keyboard in a steady, rhythmic pattern. Up close, I could see that his eyes were bloodshot and had a glassy quality that suggested either extreme fatigue or drug impairment. "Rodriguez, try to get the attention of someone else," I called out. "This guy isn't responding at all." Rodriguez approached a workstation about 20 feet away, where a woman in her 30s was engaged in the same intense computer work. She attempted verbal communication and physical contact, but received the same lack of response. "Morrison, none of them are acknowledging us," Rodriguez reported. "It's like they're in some kind of trance state." Martinez had been examining the electronic equipment more closely. "These aren't normal computer workstations," he observed. "This equipment looks more sophisticated than anything you'd typically find in an office environment. And look at this." He pointed to cables that ran from each workstation to a central hub located in the middle of the floor. The hub consisted of a large server rack filled with equipment that was clearly more advanced than typical computer servers. "This looks like some kind of data processing operation," Martinez continued. "But I can't imagine what kind of work would require this level of computing power and this many people working around the clock." I decided to examine what was displayed on the computer screens to get some idea of what these people were working on. Moving behind the man I had first attempted to contact, I looked over his shoulder at his monitor. What I saw made absolutely no sense. The screen was filled with rapidly scrolling text, but it wasn't in any language I recognized. The characters looked vaguely mathematical or scientific, but they were arranged in patterns that seemed random and chaotic. Numbers, symbols, and what might have been letters flowed past at a speed that would be impossible for a human to read or comprehend. "Rodriguez, come look at this," I called out. "I can't figure out what they're working on." She examined several other computer screens and found the same incomprehensible display of rapidly moving text and symbols. "It's like they're processing some kind of encrypted data, but at a speed that doesn't make sense for human operators." "Maybe they're just monitoring automated processes," Martinez suggested. "But that doesn't explain why they need so many people if the work is automated." As we continued examining the workstations, I noticed something that made the situation even more disturbing. The people operating the computers weren't just focused on their screens. They were completely motionless except for their fingers on the keyboards. They didn't blink. They didn't shift position. They didn't show any of the normal unconscious movements that people exhibit even when concentrating intensely. They sat in their chairs like statues, their eyes fixed on their screens with an unnatural stillness that suggested they weren't entirely conscious. "These people are in some kind of altered state," I said to Rodriguez. "This isn't normal human behavior." "Could they be drugged?" "Possible. But look at the precision of their typing. Whatever they're doing requires fine motor control and sustained attention. Most drugs that would cause this level of stupor would also impair their ability to operate equipment." The mechanical sounds we had heard from outside were much louder on the second floor, and I could now identify their source. The server equipment in the central hub was generating most of the noise, along with cooling fans and other hardware that was working at maximum capacity. But there were other sounds too. The rhythmic tapping I had noticed earlier was coming from the keyboards. With 70 people typing simultaneously in the same steady rhythm, the cumulative effect created a constant percussion that echoed throughout the large space. "We need to find whoever's in charge of this operation," Rodriguez said. "There has to be someone directing this activity." We decided to explore the rest of the building to see if the other floors contained similar operations, or if we could find the leadership structure behind whatever was happening here. The third floor revealed an even more disturbing scene. Instead of workstations, this floor contained what appeared to be living quarters, rows of cots and sleeping bags arranged with military precision. Personal belongings were scattered around each sleeping area, suggesting that the people operating the computers on the second floor were actually living in the building. "They're not just working here," Martinez observed. "They're living here full-time." The living quarters showed signs of long-term occupation. Clothes hung from improvised lines, personal hygiene items were arranged on makeshift shelves, and the smell of unwashed bodies and confined living was pervasive throughout the floor. But what disturbed me most was the apparent organization of the living space. Everything was arranged in neat, orderly rows with precise spacing between sleeping areas. Personal belongings were organized identically at each sleeping station. It looked more like a military barracks or institutional housing than a place where people had chosen to live voluntarily. "This level of organization suggests significant planning and leadership," Rodriguez observed. "Someone is coordinating this entire operation." We found evidence of that leadership structure on the fourth floor. The fourth floor had been converted into what appeared to be a command center. Instead of the rows of identical workstations we had found on the second floor, this space contained sophisticated monitoring equipment, multiple large-screen displays, and workstations that were clearly designed for management and oversight rather than data processing. But most importantly, the fourth floor contained people who were alert and responsive, individuals who were clearly in charge of whatever operation was taking place in the building. As we emerged from the stairwell onto the fourth floor, we were immediately confronted by 3 people who had obviously been expecting our arrival. "Officers Morrison and Rodriguez," said a woman who appeared to be in her 40s, with short dark hair and the kind of professional demeanor typical of corporate executives. "I'm Dr. Sarah Blackwood, and I've been hoping we would have an opportunity to speak." The fact that she knew our names was immediately concerning, since we hadn't identified ourselves to anyone in the building who had been responsive enough to communicate that information. "Dr. Blackwood, I need to see some identification, and I need an explanation for what's happening in this building," I said, keeping my hand near my service weapon. "Of course," she replied calmly, producing a driver's license that identified her as Sarah Blackwood of Los Angeles. "I'm a research psychologist, and what you've discovered here is a legitimate scientific experiment." "What kind of experiment requires 70 people working in an abandoned building without proper permits or utility services?" "We're conducting research into collective consciousness and distributed problem solving," Dr. Blackwood explained. The participants you observed are volunteers who are helping us test whether large groups of people can solve complex computational problems more effectively than traditional computer systems. Rodriguez stepped forward. Dr. Blackwood, the people downstairs aren't responding to verbal communication or physical contact. They appear to be in altered states of consciousness. That doesn't sound like voluntary participation in research. The research requires intense concentration and focus, Doctor, Blackwood said. Participants undergo conditioning to help them maintain the necessary level of attention for extended periods. It's similar to deep meditation or hypnotic states. How long have these people been in the building? The current experiment began 3 weeks ago. Participants committed to a 30-day intensive research period with minimal outside contact to avoid disrupting their conditioning. Martinez had been examining the equipment on the 4th floor while Dr. Blackwood spoke with us. "Officer Morrison, you need to see this," he called out urgently. He was standing in front of a large wall-mounted display that showed what appeared to be a map of the United States with dozens of red dots scattered across different states. Each of these dots represents a research site, Dr. Blackwood said before I could ask. "We're conducting similar experiments in multiple locations simultaneously to test the scalability of our approach." "How many people are involved in these experiments?" "Approximately 3,000 participants across 47 research sites." The scope of what Dr. Blackwood was describing was staggering. If she was telling the truth, we had stumbled upon a massive research operation involving thousands of people in dozens of locations. But if she was lying, we were dealing with something far more sinister. A network of facilities where people were being held against their will and subjected to psychological manipulation for unknown purposes. The investigation was about to reveal which interpretation was correct. Dr. Blackwood led us to a conference room on the 4th floor, where she had assembled documentation that she claimed would explain the research operation and demonstrate that all participants were volunteers who had provided informed consent. "Officers, I understand this situation appears unusual, but I assure you that everything we're doing here is legal and ethical," Dr. Blackwood said as she spread documents across the conference table. "These are consent forms signed by each participant, along with medical evaluations and psychological assessments." I examined the paperwork while Rodriguez continued questioning Dr. Blackwood about the nature of the research and the conditions in which participants were being held. "Dr. Blackwood, even if these people volunteered for your experiment, the building doesn't have proper permits for this kind of occupancy, and you're operating without electrical service," Rodriguez pointed out. "We have independent power generation for our equipment," Dr. Blackwood replied. "And we've been working with city officials to obtain the necessary permits. The research has significant potential benefits that justify temporary exceptions to normal regulatory requirements." The consent forms appeared to be legitimate legal documents, signed and witnessed, indicating that the participants had agreed to take part in a 30-day research study investigating collective problem-solving and distributed consciousness. Each form included detailed descriptions of the procedures involved and acknowledgement that participants would be isolated from outside contact during the experiment. But several aspects of the documentation raised red flags. The consent forms were all dated within a 3-day period 3 weeks earlier, suggesting that all 70 participants had been recruited simultaneously rather than through a normal enrollment process. The medical evaluations showed that all participants were in good physical health, but many had histories of depression, anxiety, or other mental health issues that might make them vulnerable to psychological manipulation. "Dr. Blackwood, who is funding this research?" I asked while continuing to review the documentation. "The primary funding comes from the Cognitive Research Institute in Los Angeles, with additional support from federal grants related to artificial intelligence and cognitive science research." Martinez had been examining the computer systems on the fourth floor more closely. Dr. Blackwood. This equipment is far more sophisticated than anything typically used for psychological research. Some of this looks like military-grade hardware. The computational requirements for our research are substantial, Dr. Blackwood explained. We're processing enormous amounts of data in real time, which requires advanced computing capabilities. I decided to contact the Cognitive Research Institute to verify Dr. Blackwood's claims about funding and authorization for the research. But when I called the number listed on the research documentation, I reached a disconnected phone line. Dr. Blackwood, the contact information for your funding organization isn't working. That's not surprising, she replied calmly. The Institute uses secure communication protocols for research-related inquiries. I can provide you with alternative contact information, but verification will require clearance through federal agencies that oversee classified research. The mention of classified research and federal oversight made the situation more complex. If Dr. Blackwood was telling the truth, we might be interfering with legitimate, government-sponsored research. But if she was lying, the federal connection could indicate a much more serious criminal operation. I radioed dispatch to request assistance from federal agencies that might have information about classified research operations. Unit 19 to dispatch. I need contact information for federal agencies that might have jurisdiction over classified cognitive research operations. Copy that, Unit 19. We'll contact FBI and DoD liaisons to see if they have any information about authorized research in your area. While waiting for federal agency contact, Rodriguez and I decided to interview some of the participants on the second floor to verify that they were truly volunteers and to assess their mental and physical condition. Dr. Blackwood accompanied us back to the second floor, where the 70 participants continued their intensive computer work with the same unnatural focus and stillness we had observed earlier. The conditioning process makes direct communication difficult, Dr. Blackwood explained as we approached the workstations. Participants are in deep meditative states that allow them to interface more effectively with the computer systems. How do we verify that they're here voluntarily if we can't communicate with them? I can demonstrate the process for bringing participants out of the conditioned state, but it disrupts their work and requires recalibration of their conditioning. Dr. Blackwood approached one of the workstations where a young woman was engaged in the same intense typing and screen watching as all the other participants. She placed her hand on the woman's shoulder and spoke in a calm, measured tone. "Jennifer, this is Dr. Blackwood. I need you to come out of your work state and speak with the police officers who are visiting us." The woman's typing gradually slowed, and after about 30 seconds she turned away from her computer screen and looked at Dr. Blackwood with confused, unfocused eyes. "Dr. Blackwood," she said in a voice that sounded groggy and disoriented. "What's happening? How long was I working?" "Jennifer, these are police officers who need to verify that you're participating in our research voluntarily. Can you tell them about your decision to join the experiment?" Jennifer looked at Rodriguez and me with increasing clarity as she became more alert. "I signed up for the research study 3 weeks ago. I'm a graduate student in psychology at UC Berkeley, and I was recruited through the university's research participation program." "Jennifer, are you here voluntarily?" Rodriguez asked. "Do you want to continue participating in this research?" "Yes, absolutely. The research is fascinating and the compensation is excellent. I'm earning more in 30 days than I normally make in a semester. How do you feel physically? Are you getting adequate food, sleep, and medical care?" "I feel fine. The work is intense, but Dr. Blackwood's team takes good care of us. We get regular breaks, good meals, and medical monitoring." Jennifer's responses seemed genuine. and indicated that she was a willing participant who was satisfied with her treatment. But something about her demeanor suggested that her judgment might be impaired by whatever conditioning process Dr. Blackwood had described. "Jennifer, do you remember what you were working on at your computer?" She paused, looking confused. "I'm not sure. It's something related to pattern recognition and data analysis, but the details are fuzzy." Dr. Blackwood explained that the conditioning process makes it difficult to retain specific memories of the work sessions. "Are you concerned about not remembering what you've been doing for the past 3 weeks?" "Not really." Dr. Blackwood said that's normal for this type of research. "The important thing is that I'm contributing to important scientific discoveries." Rodriguez and I exchanged glances. Jennifer appeared to be genuinely convinced that she was participating in legitimate research, but her inability to remember specifics about her work and her uncritical acceptance of the conditioning process suggested possible psychological manipulation. "Jennifer, if you wanted to leave the experiment early, would you be allowed to do so?" "Of course." Dr. Blackwood told us from the beginning that we could withdraw from the study at any time. "But I don't want to leave, and this is the most important research I've ever been involved in." After speaking with Jennifer, Dr. Blackwood returned her to the conditioned state using the same process in reverse. Within minutes, Jennifer was back to her computer, typing with the same intense focus and apparent unawareness of her surroundings. We interviewed 2 other participants with similar results. All claimed to be volunteers. All expressed satisfaction with their treatment and compensation, and all seemed genuinely committed to continuing their participation in the research. But all also showed the same memory gaps and uncritical acceptance of procedures that raised concerns about their ability to make informed decisions about their continued participation. "Dr. Blackwood, I'm concerned about the participants' inability to remember details about their work and their apparent acceptance of conditions that would normally be concerning to rational individuals," I said as we returned to the 4th floor. "Officer Morrison, that's exactly what our research is designed to study," she replied. "We're investigating how consciousness and memory function when people work together as a collective intelligence. The conditioning process is necessary to achieve the level of mental synchronization required for effective collective problem solving. But doesn't that conditioning process compromise their ability to provide ongoing consent to participate? That's a valid ethical concern, and it's one we've addressed through extensive consultation with ethics boards and oversight committees. All participants provided informed consent with full knowledge that the conditioning process would affect their memory and decision-making capabilities during the experiment. The arrival of federal agents at the building would provide answers to our questions about the legitimacy of Dr. Blackwood's research operation. Answers that would prove to be more disturbing than any of us had anticipated. Special Agent Robert Martinez from the FBI's Los Angeles field office arrived at the Riverside Manufacturing Building at 3:47 a.m., accompanied by 2 agents from what they identified as a joint federal task force investigating anomalous research activities. Their rapid response to our request for information suggested that Dr. Blackwood's operation was already known to federal authorities. "Officers Morrison and Rodriguez, I'm Agent Martinez," the lead agent said as he met us in the building's lobby. "We've been tracking Dr. Blackwood's research network for several months. I need to brief you on what you've discovered here." Agent Martinez was a serious man in his early 40s, who carried himself with the kind of authority that suggested extensive experience with complex investigations. The 2 agents accompanying him were introduced only by their first names, Agent Thompson and Agent Davis, and they immediately began setting up electronic equipment in the lobby. Agent Martinez, "Doctor, Blackwood claims this is legitimate psychological research funded by federal agencies," I reported. "But we have concerns about the participants' mental state and their ability to provide ongoing consent." Dr. Blackwood is not a licensed psychologist, and her research is not authorized by any federal agency, Agent Martinez replied grimly. What you've discovered is part of a network of illegal experimentation sites that we've been attempting to locate and shut down. What kind of illegal experimentation? Dr. Blackwood and her associates are conducting unauthorized research into mind control and collective consciousness manipulation. The participants you observed are victims of sophisticated psychological conditioning designed to create a form of human-computer network. Agent Martinez led us to a secure area he had established in the lobby and showed us documentation that painted a very different picture of Dr. Blackwood's activities than what she had presented to us. Dr. Blackwood's real name is Sarah Mitchell, and she's a former researcher who was dismissed from several legitimate institutions for ethical violations, Agent Martinez explained. She's been recruiting vulnerable individuals for experimental procedures that are designed to alter brain function and create collective consciousness networks. How does the process work? The participants undergo intensive conditioning, using a combination of psychological manipulation, sleep deprivation, and experimental drugs that alter brain chemistry. Over time, they lose their individual decision-making capabilities and become components of a larger networked intelligence. Agent Thompson had been monitoring electronic equipment that appeared to be analyzing the building's electromagnetic emissions. Agent Martinez, we're detecting the same signature neural interface technology we found at the other sites, he reported. Neural interface technology? Rodriguez asked. The computer systems the participants are using aren't just processing data. They're directly interfacing with the participants' brain activity, Agent Martinez explained. Dr. Mitchell has developed technology that can read and influence neural patterns, essentially turning human beings into biological computer components. The scope and implications of what Agent Martinez was describing were staggering. If accurate, the 70 people we had found in the building weren't just participating in research. They were being used as components in an experimental computer system that was directly accessing their brains. Are the participants in immediate physical danger? I asked. The conditioning process causes progressive brain damage over time, Agent Martinez said. Participants typically show increasing cognitive impairment and loss of personality after several weeks of exposure. If we don't intervene soon, many of these people will suffer permanent psychological damage. Agent Davis had been examining the building's electrical systems and reported findings that confirmed Agent Martinez's description of the operation. The building is powered by an illegal tap into the city's electrical grid, Agent Davis reported. The power consumption is enormous, consistent with running supercomputer-level hardware throughout the building. Agent Martinez, Dr. Mitchell mentioned that this is part of a network of similar sites, Rodriguez said. How many people are involved in these experiments? We've identified 47 locations in 12 states, with approximately 3,000 people currently participating in various stages of the conditioning process. This is the largest unauthorized human experimentation network we've ever encountered. What's the ultimate goal of these experiments? We believe Dr. Mitchell is attempting to create a distributed intelligence network that combines human consciousness with advanced computing capabilities. The potential applications for such a system would be enormous, from solving complex scientific problems to developing advanced artificial intelligence. But the cost is the destruction of individual human consciousness, Agent Thompson added. The people participating in these experiments are essentially being erased as individuals and converted into components of a collective intelligence. Agent Martinez made the decision to immediately evacuate all participants from the building and provide them with medical evaluation and treatment to reverse the effects of their conditioning. Officers, we need your assistance in coordinating the evacuation. Agent Martinez said. This is going to be a complex operation because the participants have been conditioned to resist removal from the research environment. What about Dr. Mitchell and her associates? Doctor? Mitchell and her team are wanted on federal charges related to unauthorized human experimentation, kidnapping, and violations of bioethics regulations. They'll be taken into custody as part of this operation. But when we returned to the 4th floor to arrest Dr. Mitchell and her associates, we found that they had vanished. The command center that had been fully operational just an hour earlier was now empty, with computer screens dark and equipment powered down. They must have had an escape plan in place, Agent Martinez observed as we searched the empty command center. The equipment shutdown was coordinated. They didn't leave in a panic. Agent Thompson examined the computer systems and found that all data storage devices had been removed. They took everything with them: hard drives, backup systems, research data. This was a planned evacuation. How did they know we were coming? Rodriguez asked. The building probably has surveillance systems we haven't detected, Agent Martinez replied. Dr. Mitchell's operations are sophisticated enough to include counter-surveillance measures. The evacuation of the 70 participants proved to be as complex as Agent Martinez had warned. When federal agents attempted to remove people from their workstations, many resisted passively, continuing to try to access their computers even when physically separated from them. The conditioning is stronger than we anticipated, Agent Martinez observed, as medical personnel worked to sedate participants who were becoming agitated when removed from their computer work. These people have been more thoroughly programmed than participants at other sites. Emergency medical teams had to be called in to safely transport participants to area hospitals for evaluation and treatment. Many showed signs of severe sleep deprivation, malnutrition, and what appeared to be neurological damage from prolonged exposure to whatever technology Dr. Mitchell had been using. Doctor, what's the prognosis for these people? Agent Martinez asked Dr. Patricia Wilson, the emergency medicine physician coordinating the medical response. It's too early to tell, Dr. Wilson replied. We're seeing symptoms consistent with prolonged exposure to psychoactive drugs, combined with what appears to be neurological disruption from electromagnetic exposure. Some may recover completely, but others could have permanent damage. As dawn broke over Bakersfield, the massive federal operation to process the crime scene and evacuate participants was still ongoing. The Riverside Manufacturing Building had been transformed into a command center for federal agents, medical personnel, and support staff, working to document the illegal research operation. Officer Morrison, your department's investigation was crucial to shutting down this operation, Agent Martinez said as the immediate crisis phase concluded. Without your response to the citizen complaint, Doctor, Mitchell's network might have continued operating for months. Agent Martinez, what happens next? Dr. Mitchell is still at large, and there are supposedly dozens of other sites still operating. This raid will provide us with crucial intelligence about the network's structure and operations. Even though Dr. Mitchell escaped with the data, we now have participants who can be interviewed about their experiences, and we have the physical evidence of the technology being used. But the most disturbing revelation was yet to come. 3 days after the raid on the Riverside Manufacturing Building, Agent Martinez contacted me with information that fundamentally changed our understanding of what Dr. Mitchell had been attempting to accomplish with her human experimentation network. Officer Morrison, we need to meet, Agent Martinez said during a secure phone call. We've made discoveries about Dr. Mitchell's research that have national security implications. We met at the FBI's Bakersfield field office, where Agent Martinez had established a temporary command center for the ongoing investigation. The office was filled with evidence from the raid, including computer equipment, medical devices, and documentation that federal analysts had been examining around the clock. The interviews with participants from the Riverside building have revealed information about Dr. Mitchell's ultimate objectives, Agent Martinez began. This wasn't just research into collective consciousness, it was the development of a distributed intelligence system designed to solve specific types of problems. What kind of problems? According to participant interviews, the network was being used to break encryption codes, analyze classified government communications, and solve complex mathematical problems related to weapons development and intelligence gathering. Agent Martinez showed me transcripts of interviews with participants who had been successfully brought out of their conditioned states. The interviews revealed that Dr. Mitchell had been using her human-computer network to conduct unauthorized intelligence gathering operations. The participants didn't understand what they were working on because the problems were broken down into tiny components that were distributed across the entire network, Agent Martinez explained. Each person was solving small pieces of larger puzzles, so no individual participant understood the overall objectives. Was Dr. Mitchell working for a foreign government? That's what we initially suspected, but the evidence suggests something more complex. Dr. Mitchell appears to be operating independently, selling the intelligence products generated by her network to multiple buyers, including criminal organizations and hostile foreign entities. The scope of Dr. Mitchell's operation was staggering. Federal investigators had identified customers for her intelligence products in more than a dozen countries, with evidence of payments totaling millions of dollars over the past 2 years. The human-computer network was generating intelligence products that were impossible to obtain through conventional means, Agent Martinez continued. Dr. Mitchell had essentially created a biological supercomputer capable of breaking encryption systems that were supposed to be unbreakable. How many government secrets might have been compromised? We're still assessing the damage, but it could be substantial. The network had access to classified communications, financial systems, and security protocols that are fundamental to national infrastructure. The investigation into Dr. Mitchell's network had expanded to include multiple federal agencies, international intelligence services, and cybersecurity organizations. The implications of her work extended far beyond the illegal human experimentation to include potential threats to national security and international stability. Agent Martinez, what about the other research sites? Are they still operational? We've conducted simultaneous raids on all 47 sites we were able to identify. We rescued approximately 2,800 people and shut down the known network operations. But Dr. Mitchell and her core associates remain at large. The coordinated raids had revealed that Dr. Mitchell's network was even more sophisticated than federal investigators had initially understood. Each site had been carefully designed to appear legitimate while conducting illegal research and intelligence gathering operations. The participants at different sites were working on different types of problems, Agent Martinez explained. Some sites focused on encryption breaking, others on financial market analysis, and still others on scientific research problems. Dr. Mitchell had created a distributed problem-solving system that could be applied to virtually any complex challenge. But perhaps most disturbing was the revelation that Dr. Mitchell had been refining her techniques over time, with participants at more recent sites showing higher levels of conditioning and integration with the computer systems. The Riverside building was one of her newest facilities, Agent Martinez said. The level of neural integration we found there was far more advanced than at earlier sites. Dr. Mitchell was perfecting the process of turning human beings into biological computer components. What would have happened if the operation had continued? According to our technical analysis, Dr. Mitchell was approaching the point where participants would lose all individual consciousness and become permanent components of the network. They would have been biologically alive, but psychologically erased. The medical evaluation of participants rescued from the Riverside building confirmed Agent Martinez's assessment. Many showed signs of progressive brain changes that would have become irreversible within another week or two of conditioning. Dr. Wilson reports that several participants are showing early signs of permanent neurological damage. Agent Martinez said, "We may have rescued them just in time to prevent complete loss of individual consciousness." But the investigation also revealed that Dr. Mitchell had been developing even more advanced techniques for future operations. Federal forensic specialists examining the equipment recovered from the Riverside manufacturing building made discoveries that challenged our understanding of the technology Dr. Mitchell had been using to interface with participants' brains. "Officer Morrison, you need to see what our technical team has found," Agent Martinez said, as he led me to a secure laboratory that had been established in a federal facility outside Bakersfield. The laboratory contained equipment that looked more like something from a science fiction movie than anything I had ever seen in a criminal investigation. Computer systems with unusual configurations were connected to what appeared to be medical monitoring devices, but with modifications that served purposes I couldn't immediately understand. Dr. Mitchell wasn't just using conventional computer interfaces, explained Dr. Michael Thompson, the federal forensic specialist leading the technical analysis. She had developed technology that could directly interface with human neural networks. How is that possible? The computer systems included neural interface hardware that could read and influence brainwave patterns through electromagnetic fields, Dr. Thompson continued. Participants weren't just typing on keyboards, their brains were directly connected to the computer network. The implications of this technology were staggering. If Dr. Mitchell had developed reliable brain-computer interfaces, the applications would extend far beyond her illegal intelligence-gathering operations. The medical monitoring equipment was modified to deliver precisely controlled electromagnetic pulses to specific areas of participants' brains, Dr. Thompson explained. Over time, this conditioning process altered participants' neural patterns to make them more compatible with the computer systems. Is this technology reproducible? Based on what we've found, Dr. Mitchell's techniques require extremely sophisticated understanding of neuroscience, computer engineering, and electromagnetic field manipulation. The technology isn't something that could be easily replicated by other criminal organizations. But the federal investigation had also revealed that Dr. Mitchell hadn't developed this technology alone. Evidence found at various raid sites indicated that she had been working with a team of specialists, including neuroscientists, computer engineers, and medical researchers. We've identified at least 12 individuals who were working with Dr. Mitchell on different aspects of the technology development, Agent Martinez reported. Most are still at large and could potentially continue her work. The search for Dr. Mitchell and her associates had become a priority operation for multiple federal agencies. The potential national security implications of her brain-computer interface technology made her capture essential for protecting classified information and preventing the technology from being acquired by hostile entities. The technology has applications beyond intelligence gathering, Dr. Thompson observed. It could be used for advanced artificial intelligence development, medical treatment of neurological conditions, or even enhancement of human cognitive capabilities. But it could also be used for mind control and psychological manipulation on a massive scale, Agent Martinez added. If this technology were acquired by authoritarian governments or terrorist organizations, it could be used to create armies of conditioned individuals. The investigation into Dr. Mitchell's research had attracted attention from intelligence agencies around the world. Several countries had expressed interest in either acquiring the technology or ensuring that it was completely suppressed to prevent its misuse. We're dealing with a technology that could fundamentally change the nature of human consciousness and free will, Agent Martinez said. The ethical and security implications are unprecedented. But the most disturbing discovery was yet to come. Evidence that Dr. Mitchell's research had been successful beyond what anyone had imagined. Analysis of data recovered from the computer systems at the Riverside Manufacturing Building revealed that Dr. Mitchell's human-computer network had achieved breakthrough results in several areas of research that had profound implications for both science and national security. Officer Morrison, we need to discuss some classified findings from our technical analysis, Agent Martinez said during a secure briefing at the federal facility. What Dr. Mitchell accomplished with her network goes beyond anything we initially understood. The briefing was conducted in a classified environment with several federal officials whose agencies I wasn't authorized to know. The level of security suggested that the discoveries had implications far beyond criminal investigation. The human-computer network successfully solved several problems that have been considered unsolvable by conventional means, Dr. Thompson reported, including encryption algorithms that protect critical government and military communications. How is that possible? Human brains process information in ways that are fundamentally different from digital computers, Dr. Thompson explained. Dr. Mitchell's network combined the pattern recognition capabilities of human consciousness with the processing power of advanced computer systems. The results had been remarkable. The network had broken encryption codes that were supposed to require decades of computer processing time, solved mathematical problems that had puzzled researchers for years, and developed new algorithms for artificial intelligence and machine learning. The implications for cybersecurity are catastrophic, Agent Martinez said. If Dr. Mitchell's technology were to be widely deployed, it could compromise virtually any digital security system currently in use. But the network had also made discoveries that could benefit humanity, potential breakthroughs in medical research, solutions to environmental problems, and advances in scientific understanding that could improve life for millions of people. The ethical dilemma is unprecedented, observed Dr. Patricia Hamilton, a bioethics specialist who had been brought in to consult on the case. The technology was developed through illegal human experimentation, but it has produced results that could solve some of humanity's most pressing problems. The federal government faced difficult decisions about how to handle Dr. Mitchell's research and its results. Simply suppressing the technology would prevent its misuse, but it would also eliminate potential benefits that could save lives and improve human welfare. We're dealing with knowledge that shouldn't exist, but does, Agent Martinez said, and we have to decide what to do with it. The search for Dr. Mitchell had taken on new urgency as federal agencies recognized that her technology could not be allowed to fall into the wrong hands. Intelligence services around the world were reportedly seeking to acquire or develop similar capabilities. Dr. Mitchell has become one of the most wanted individuals in the world, Agent Martinez reported, not just for her criminal activities, but for the strategic value of her knowledge and technology. But the investigation had also revealed that Dr. Mitchell's research was based on discoveries that went back decades, suggesting that similar work might be underway in other locations by other researchers. The techniques Dr. Mitchell used aren't entirely original, Dr. Thompson observed. We've found references to similar research dating back to the 1960s, suggesting that brain-computer interface technology has been under development for much longer than publicly acknowledged. This revelation raised disturbing questions about whether Dr. Mitchell's work was part of a larger, long-term research program involving multiple organizations and possibly government agencies. We may be dealing with just one visible portion of a much larger research network, Agent Martinez acknowledged. Dr. Mitchell might have been a rogue researcher, or she might have been part of a program that we haven't yet identified. The implications of either possibility were troubling. If Dr. Mitchell was working alone, her success suggested that the technology was more accessible than previously believed. If she was part of a larger program, there might be other networks operating undetected. 6 weeks after the raid on the Riverside Manufacturing Building, federal authorities received intelligence that Dr. Mitchell was establishing a new research facility in a remote area of Nevada. The information came from one of her former associates who had been captured during raids on other network sites and agreed to cooperate in exchange for reduced charges. "Officer Morrison, we'd like you to participate in the operation to apprehend Dr. Mitchell," Agent Martinez said during a briefing at the FBI field office. "Your experience with her operations and your investigative skills would be valuable for this mission." The Nevada facility was located in an abandoned military installation that provided ideal conditions for Dr. Mitchell's research. Isolated location, existing power infrastructure, and buildings designed to contain classified activities. According to our source, Dr. Mitchell has been recruiting new participants for an advanced version of her human-computer network, Agent Martinez explained. The technology has been refined based on lessons learned from the previous operations. The federal operation to capture Dr. Mitchell involved multiple agencies and specialized units trained in handling complex criminal networks. The scale of the operation reflected the priority that had been placed on stopping her research and preventing the technology from being further developed or distributed. "We have one opportunity to end this," Agent Martinez said as the operation team prepared for deployment. "If Dr. Mitchell escapes again, she could disappear permanently and continue her work in a location we might never find." The Nevada facility was located in a desert environment that provided natural isolation, but also created challenges for surveillance and approach. Federal teams had been monitoring the facility for 2 weeks, documenting the movement of personnel and equipment that confirmed Dr. Mitchell's presence. "We've identified approximately 40 participants at the Nevada site," Agent Martinez reported during the final briefing. "Based on electromagnetic emissions, the facility appears to be running advanced versions of the neural interface technology." The operation began at dawn with coordinated approaches from multiple directions. Federal agents moved to secure the facility perimeter while specialized teams prepared to enter the buildings and evacuate participants. But as teams approached the main research building, they encountered something unexpected. "Agent Martinez, you need to see this," radioed the team leader as agents reached the building entrance. The research facility was empty. Not just evacuated, but completely stripped of equipment and personnel. The buildings contained only empty rooms and disconnected cables where sophisticated computer systems had recently been operating. "She knew we were coming," Agent Martinez said grimly as we examined the abandoned facility. "This was evacuated recently, probably within the last 24 hours. Federal forensic teams found evidence that confirmed Dr. Mitchell had been operating at the Nevada site, but she had once again managed to escape with her equipment and research data before authorities could intervene. We're dealing with someone who has extensive counter-surveillance capabilities," Agent Martinez observed. "Dr. Mitchell seems to be able to anticipate our operations and stay ahead of our investigation." The pattern of successful escapes suggested that Dr. Mitchell either had access to intelligence about federal operations or had developed surveillance capabilities that allowed her to detect law enforcement activity. "It's also possible that she has supporters within government agencies who are providing information about our operations," Agent Martinez said during a secure briefing after the failed Nevada raid. The investigation into potential inside assistance led to uncomfortable questions about whether Dr. Mitchell's research had attracted interest from legitimate government programs that might be providing covert support for her activities. "The technology she's developed has obvious applications for intelligence gathering and military operations," Agent Martinez acknowledged. It's possible that some agencies view her work as valuable enough to justify overlooking the illegal methods she's using. But regardless of whether Dr. Mitchell was receiving inside assistance, her ability to stay ahead of federal investigators was making it increasingly difficult to shut down her research network. We need to change our approach, Agent Martinez decided. Instead of trying to track Dr. Mitchell directly, we need to focus on preventing her from recruiting new participants and acquiring the resources needed for her operations. The federal investigation shifted to monitoring potential recruitment channels and tracking the acquisition of specialized equipment that would be required for Dr. Mitchell's neural interface technology. 3 months after the failed Nevada operation, the investigation into Dr. Mitchell's activities took an unexpected turn when federal investigators discovered that her research was connected to a classified government program that had been operating for decades. Officer Morrison, we need to discuss some extremely sensitive information that has emerged from our investigation, Agent Martinez said during a meeting at a secure federal facility. What I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest levels and cannot be discussed outside this room. The revelation that Agent Martinez shared fundamentally changed everything we thought we understood about Dr. Mitchell's research and its origins. Dr. Mitchell's work is based on research that was originally conducted by government agencies starting in the 1960s as part of classified programs investigating mind control and human consciousness manipulation, Agent Martinez explained. The neural interface technology she's using was developed through decades of secret research, funded by intelligence and military agencies. Are you saying the government created this technology? The basic techniques were developed through classified programs, but the research was officially terminated in the 1990s due to ethical concerns and limited practical applications. Dr. Mitchell obtained access to classified research documents and continued developing the technology independently. The classified government research had been conducted under various program names over several decades, with participants who were often unaware of the true nature of the experiments being conducted on them. The programs had been shut down when congressional oversight committees learned about the unethical human experimentation. But Dr. Mitchell's work represents a significant advancement beyond what the government programs achieved, Agent Martinez continued. She solved technical problems that had prevented the original research from producing practical applications. How did she get access to classified research? Dr. Mitchell was employed by defense contractors that had access to the classified research. She was working on legitimate applications of brain-computer interface technology when she began developing her illegal human experimentation network. The government connection explained several puzzling aspects of Dr. Mitchell's operations, including her access to advanced technology, her sophisticated counter-surveillance capabilities, and her ability to operate undetected for years. Some individuals within government agencies may have been aware of Dr. Mitchell's work and chose not to intervene because they were interested in the results she was achieving, Agent Martinez said carefully. Are you saying the government was supporting her illegal experiments? Not officially, but there may have been unofficial tolerance or even covert assistance from individuals who believed her research was valuable for national security purposes. The investigation into government connections had uncovered a complex web of relationships between Dr. Mitchell, defense contractors, intelligence agencies, and research institutions that had been involved in developing brain-computer interface technology. The technology has applications that go far beyond intelligence gathering, Agent Martinez explained. It could be used for treating neurological conditions, enhancing human cognitive capabilities, or developing advanced artificial intelligence systems. But the ethical implications of the research remained troubling, regardless of its potential benefits. The technology had been developed through illegal human experimentation that had caused permanent damage to hundreds of people. We're facing a situation where revolutionary technology exists, but it was created through methods that cannot be condoned, Agent Martinez said. The government has to decide whether to suppress the technology completely or find ways to continue developing it through ethical means. The decision would have implications far beyond Dr. Mitchell's criminal case. The technology represented potential breakthroughs in multiple fields, but accepting its benefits would require acknowledging and learning from research conducted through illegal human experimentation. What happens to Dr. Mitchell now? I asked. She remains a fugitive, but the priority for capturing her has changed, Agent Martinez replied. The focus has shifted from stopping her research to controlling how the technology is developed and applied. The revelation that Dr. Mitchell's work was connected to classified government programs raised disturbing questions about the boundaries between legitimate research and criminal experimentation, and about whether government agencies could be trusted to conduct ethical research into technologies with such profound implications for human consciousness and freedom. 1 year after my initial response to Margaret Sullivan's complaint about sounds in the abandoned building, I received a final briefing from Agent Martinez about the conclusion of the federal investigation into Dr. Mitchell's research network. Officer Morrison, I wanted to update you on the final resolution of the case, Agent Martinez said during a meeting at the Kern County Sheriff's Department. The investigation has been concluded, and decisions have been made about how to handle Dr. Mitchell's research and technology. Dr. Mitchell had never been captured, but federal agencies had succeeded in shutting down her known research operations and preventing her from establishing new facilities. The hundreds of people who had been rescued from her network sites had received medical treatment and psychological support to help them recover from their experiences. Most of the participants have recovered successfully, Agent Martinez reported. Some have permanent neurological effects, but the majority have been able to resume normal lives. A few have even provided valuable information about their experiences that has helped us understand the technology better. The federal government had made the decision to continue developing brain-computer interface technology through legitimate research programs, but with strict ethical oversight and informed consent protocols. The potential benefits of the technology were considered too valuable to abandon completely. Dr. Mitchell's work demonstrated that direct neural interfaces are possible and can produce remarkable results, Agent Martinez explained. But future research will be conducted through established institutions with proper oversight and ethical guidelines. Several of Dr. Mitchell's former associates had been captured and prosecuted, providing additional information about the technology and research methods. But Dr. Mitchell herself remained at large, presumably continuing her work in a location that federal investigators had been unable to identify. We believe she may have relocated her operations outside the United States, Agent Martinez said. Intelligence agencies around the world are monitoring for signs of her activities, but she has proven to be exceptionally skilled at avoiding detection. The case had led to changes in how law enforcement agencies responded to reports of unusual activities in abandoned buildings and remote locations. Training programs now included information about recognizing signs of illegal human experimentation and the proper procedures for investigating such activities. Your response to the original citizen complaint was crucial to uncovering this network, Agent Martinez said. Without your investigation, Doctor, Mitchell's operations might have continued for years without detection. For me, the case had been a reminder that police work sometimes leads to discoveries that challenge our understanding of reality and force us to confront ethical questions that go far beyond normal criminal investigation. The sounds that Margaret Sullivan had heard coming from the abandoned building had led to the discovery of technology that could fundamentally change human consciousness and the nature of individual identity. The investigation had revealed that the boundaries between legitimate research and criminal experimentation were more blurred than most people realized. The case raises questions about how society should handle revolutionary technologies that are developed through unethical means, I reflected during my final conversation with Agent Martinez. Do we reject beneficial discoveries because of how they were obtained, or do we find ways to use them ethically while preventing similar abuses in the future? Those are questions that go beyond law enforcement, Agent Martinez replied. But our job is to ensure that people like Dr. Mitchell can't exploit vulnerable individuals for their research, regardless of how valuable the results might be. The abandoned Riverside manufacturing building had been demolished 6 months after the raid, and the site had been converted into a memorial park honoring the victims of illegal human experimentation. A plaque at the entrance carried a simple message: "In memory of those who suffered so that others might understand the value of informed consent and ethical research." Margaret Sullivan had moved to a different apartment complex after the investigation concluded, saying she could no longer sleep peacefully knowing what had been happening across the street. But she had expressed gratitude that her complaint had led to the rescue of people who were being exploited. "I'm glad I called the police," she had told me during a follow-up interview. Those sounds I heard weren't just machinery. They were people crying for help in the only way they could. The case of the sounds in the walls had taught me that citizens' complaints about unusual activities should always be taken seriously, no matter how improbable they might seem. Sometimes the most extraordinary criminal operations hide behind facades of normalcy, and only careful investigation can reveal the truth. As I continued my patrol work in Kern County, I remained alert for signs of activities that might indicate illegal research or human experimentation. The technology that Dr. Mitchell had developed might be too valuable to abandon completely, but law enforcement had a responsibility to ensure that future research was conducted with respect for human dignity and individual rights. The sounds that Margaret Sullivan heard in the abandoned building had been the voices of people whose consciousness was being systematically erased and rebuilt. Her complaint had given them back their voices and their freedom, but it had also revealed a technology that would continue to challenge our understanding of human consciousness for generations to come. The badge I wore represented a commitment to protecting people from exploitation and harm. But the case had shown me that sometimes the greatest threats come from those who claim to be advancing human knowledge and capability. The line between beneficial research and criminal exploitation is often thinner than we realize, and it requires constant vigilance to ensure that the pursuit of knowledge doesn't come at the cost of human dignity and freedom. The first phantom call came in at 3:42 a.m. on a Tuesday night in October, when the autumn chill had settled over Cedar Falls like a heavy blanket. I had been working the overnight shift for the Cedar Falls Police Department for 3 years, and I thought I'd heard every kind of emergency call that could come through dispatch. Unit 24, we have a domestic disturbance at 1847 Maple Grove Drive, came the voice of dispatcher Tony Martinez through my radio. Caller reports screaming and sounds of violence, requesting immediate response. I grabbed the radio and confirmed my response while already turning my patrol car toward the Maple Grove neighborhood. Domestic disturbance calls were always unpredictable and potentially dangerous, especially in the early morning hours when alcohol and exhaustion could turn minor arguments into life-threatening situations. Unit 24, responding. ETA 4 minutes. Any additional information from the caller? Negative, Unit 24. Caller hung up after reporting the disturbance. Phone number shows as disconnected when we attempted callback. That wasn't unusual. People reporting domestic violence often used payphones or borrowed phones, and they frequently hung up quickly out of fear of retaliation. I'd responded to hundreds of similar calls over the years. The Maple Grove neighborhood was one of Cedar Falls' older residential areas, filled with modest two-story houses built in the 1960s and 1970s. Most of the residents were working families or retirees who kept to themselves and rarely caused problems for law enforcement. As I drove through the quiet streets at nearly 4 a.m., every house appeared dark and peaceful. 1847 Maple Grove Drive was a small ranch house with a well-maintained yard and no signs of disturbance. I parked my patrol car in front of the house and observed the property for several minutes before approaching. There were no lights on inside, no sounds of argument or violence, and no vehicles in the driveway. I walked up to the front door and knocked firmly. Cedar Falls Police. We received a report of a disturbance at this address. No response. I knocked again, louder this time, and announced myself again. Still no answer. I walked around the perimeter of the house, using my flashlight to check windows and doors. Everything appeared secure, and there were no signs of forced entry or struggle. The house seemed completely empty. I radioed dispatch to report my findings. Unit 24 to dispatch. No signs of disturbance at 1847 Maple Grove Drive. House appears vacant. No response to police presence. Copy that, Unit 24. We'll mark it as unfounded. Any signs the house is occupied? Negative. No vehicles, no lights, looks like it might be empty. I was about to return to my patrol car when I noticed something odd. A small sign in the front yard, partially hidden by overgrown bushes, indicated that the house was for sale. But the sign was weathered and faded, suggesting it had been there for a long time. Out of curiosity, I checked with city records the next morning and discovered that 1847 Maple Grove Drive had been vacant for over 8 months. The previous owners had moved out of state, and the house had been on the market without any serious buyers. There was no way someone could have made a domestic disturbance call from inside an empty house. Probably just a prank call or someone got the address wrong, Tony Martinez said when I asked him about it during shift change. Happens sometimes, especially with the college kids. But something about the call bothered me. The voice reporting the disturbance had sounded genuinely frightened, not like someone playing a prank. And the specific details about screaming and sounds of violence seemed too realistic for a casual hoax. 3 nights later, at 2:18 a.m., dispatch sent me to another domestic disturbance call. Unit 24. We have a report of domestic violence at 923 Oak Street. Caller states there's a man hitting a woman and threatening to kill her. Requesting immediate response. Oak Street was in a different part of town, an area of apartment complexes and small businesses near the college campus. I responded with lights and sirens, expecting to find a serious situation requiring immediate intervention. 923 Oak Street turned out to be a small apartment building with 6 units. I arrived to find the building completely dark and silent. I checked with the building manager who lived on site and learned that the building had been condemned 3 weeks earlier due to structural problems. All the tenants had been relocated, and the building was scheduled for demolition. Nobody's been in there for weeks, the manager told me. The city has it all sealed up. You can see the notices on the doors. Indeed, official condemnation notices were posted on every entrance, and the doors were secured with heavy chains and padlocks. There was no way anyone could have been inside the building to make a domestic violence call, and certainly no way for violent activity to be taking place in an empty, sealed building. I radioed dispatch with my findings, and once again, the call was marked as unfounded. But when I asked Tony about the specifics of the call, he insisted that the caller had provided detailed information about ongoing violence and had seemed genuinely distressed. The voice was clear, professional sounding, Tony told me. Definitely not a prank. Someone called from that location reporting domestic violence in progress. But the building's been empty for weeks. There's no phone service, no electricity. How could someone call from there? Tony checked his computer records and frowned. According to this, the call came from a landline registered to apartment 4B. But if the building's condemned, we were both puzzled by the discrepancy. But with no evidence of actual criminal activity, there wasn't much we could do except file the reports and move on to other calls. The third phantom call came 5 nights later, and this time I was starting to see a pattern that made me seriously concerned. Unit 24, we have a child in danger at 1205 Elm Street. Caller reports a young girl crying for help and sounds of physical abuse. Immediate response required. Calls involving children always got my immediate attention. I responded to 1205 Elm Street with a sense of urgency, prepared to deal with whatever situation I might find. 1205. Elm Street was a small house in a neighborhood I knew well, but as I pulled up to the address, I immediately recognized a problem. The house had burned down 6 months earlier in an electrical fire. The lot now contained only the concrete foundation and some charred debris that hadn't been cleared away yet. There was no house at 1205 Elm Street. There hadn't been for half a year. I stood on the empty lot, looking at the foundation where a house had once stood, trying to understand how someone could have called 911 from a location that no longer existed. The nearest intact house was 50 yards away, with a completely different address. When I radioed dispatch to report that the address was a vacant lot, Tony's response was immediate and concerned. Unit 24, that's impossible. I took the call myself. A woman called from 1205 Elm Street reporting child abuse in progress. She gave me specific details about a little girl being hurt. Tony, I'm standing on an empty lot. The house burned down 6 months ago. There's nothing here but a foundation. Barbara, I'm looking at my call log right now. The call came from a landline registered to 1205 Elm Street. Duration was 3 minutes and 17 seconds. The caller provided detailed information about ongoing child abuse. I requested that a supervisor meet me at the location to document the discrepancy. Sergeant Robert Hayes arrived within 20 minutes and confirmed my observations. There was definitely no house at 1205 Elm Street, and there hadn't been since the fire. This is the third call like this you've responded to, Sergeant Hayes said as we stood on the empty lot. All 3 addresses turned out to be vacant or non-existent properties. Yes, sir. And all 3 calls were reported as coming from landlines at those addresses, even though there's no way for phone service to exist at any of these locations. We need to investigate this more thoroughly. Either someone is playing an elaborate hoax, or we have a serious problem with our dispatch system. Sergeant Hayes decided to review all the emergency calls that had come in during my shifts over the past 2 weeks. What he found was disturbing. In addition to the 3 phantom calls I had responded to, there had been 7 other emergency calls to vacant or non-existent addresses during my overnight shifts. All had been reported as coming from landlines at the addresses in question. This is either a sophisticated prank targeting your specific shifts, or we're dealing with some kind of technical malfunction that's creating false emergency calls, Sergeant Hayes concluded. But the technical explanation didn't make sense either. The dispatch center's computer systems were regularly maintained and tested, and there was no known malfunction that could generate false calls with specific addresses and detailed scenarios. The voices are different each time, Tony pointed out when we reviewed the call logs. Different genders, different ages, different accents. It's not the same person making multiple calls. Could someone be hacking into our dispatch system and creating false calls? Possible, but but they'd need very sophisticated knowledge of our computer systems and phone networks, and they'd have to know specific addresses that happened to be vacant or demolished. The investigation into the phantom calls was about to take a turn that would challenge everything I thought I understood about emergency response and the nature of reality itself. A week after Sergeant Hayes began his investigation, I received a call that was different from the previous phantom calls in a way that made my blood run cold. Unit 24. We have a report of an officer down at 1542 Pine Street. Caller states a police officer has been shot and needs immediate medical assistance. An officer down call was the most serious emergency any police department could receive. I responded immediately, radioing for backup and medical support while racing toward Pine Street. But as I approached 1542 Pine Street, I felt a sense of dread that had nothing to do with the emergency call. The address was in a neighborhood I had patrolled regularly, and I was fairly certain what I would find when I arrived. 1542. Pine Street was another vacant lot. This one had never had a house on it. It was just an empty piece of land between two occupied houses, overgrown with weeds and marked with a for sale sign that had been there for years. I stood in the empty lot, staring at the weeds and trying to understand what was happening. Someone had called 911 to report that a police officer had been shot at a location that was just an empty piece of land. But the most disturbing part was the timing. The call had come in at exactly 3:42 a.m., the same time as the first phantom call I had received 2 weeks earlier. I radioed dispatch to report my findings, and Tony's response was immediate and shaken. Barbara, the caller, specifically mentioned your unit number. She said Unit 24 was down and needed medical assistance. What did she say exactly? She said Unit 24 has been shot at 1542 Pine Street. Officer Barbara Sullivan is bleeding and unconscious. Send paramedics immediately. The phantom caller had known my name and unit number. They had called to report that I was shot and unconscious at a vacant lot where no shooting had occurred. But the most chilling part was that the call had been made while I was sitting in my patrol car several miles away, perfectly fine and uninjured. Tony, did the caller ID show a number for this call? Yes, it came from a landline registered to 1542 Pine Street. That's impossible. There's no house here. There's never been a house here. As backup units and medical personnel arrived to find me standing uninjured in an empty lot, I began to realize that the phantom calls weren't random pranks or technical malfunctions. Someone or something was specifically targeting me, creating false emergency calls to locations that didn't exist, and somehow knowing details about my patrol activities that should have been impossible to obtain. The investigation into the phantom calls was about to reveal something far more disturbing than electronic pranks or dispatch system errors. The department brought in technical specialists from the state police to investigate our dispatch system after the phantom call reporting my supposed shooting. What they found in our emergency response computers would change how I understood the nature of communication and reality itself. Your dispatch system has been receiving calls that shouldn't be technically possible, explained Dr. Patricia Williams, a communications specialist with the Iowa State Police. The calls are coming from phone numbers that are registered to addresses where no phone service exists. How is that possible? That's what we're trying to figure out. The calls are definitely coming through the normal 911 system, not through any kind of hacking or electronic manipulation, but the source numbers are connected to properties that have been vacant, demolished, or never developed. Dr. Williams and her team had been monitoring our dispatch center for 3 days when the next phantom call came in. This time, they were able to trace the call in real time and document exactly what was happening. Unit 24. We have a fire at 867 Walnut Street. Tony announced over the radio at 2:33 a.m. Caller reports a house fire with people trapped inside. Fire department is responding. I headed toward Walnut Street, but I already suspected what I would find. Dr. Williams was monitoring the call from the dispatch center, using sophisticated equipment to track the signal source. 867 Walnut Street was a vacant lot that had never had a house built on it. The property had been purchased for development 5 years earlier, but the project had been canceled, leaving only an empty lot with a for sale sign. "Barbara, this is incredible," Dr. Williams radioed to me from the dispatch center. "The call is definitely coming from 867 Walnut Street, but our technical scan shows no electronic equipment at that location. No phone lines, no cell towers, no radio transmitters, nothing that could generate a phone call." "But someone definitely called about a fire?" "Yes, and I recorded the entire conversation. A woman's voice reporting a house fire with specific details about trapped occupants and smoke conditions. The call lasted 4 minutes and 22 seconds. When I arrived at the vacant lot, I found something that made the situation even more disturbing. Although there was no house and never had been, I could smell smoke in the air. Not the smell of burning wood or typical house fire materials, but a strange chemical odor that seemed to come from nowhere. "Dr. Williams, I'm at the location. There's no fire, no house, but I definitely smell smoke." "That's impossible, Barbara. Our thermal sensors show no heat signatures at that location." But as I stood in the empty lot, the smell of smoke grew stronger, and I began to hear sounds that shouldn't have been there. Faint voices calling for help, the crackling of flames, the sound of sirens in the distance. Yet, when I looked around, there was nothing but an empty lot surrounded by quiet houses. "I'm hearing sounds of a fire emergency," I radioed to Dr. Williams. "Voices calling for help, sounds of flames, but there's nothing here." "Barbara, you need to leave that location immediately and return to the station." Something in Dr. Williams' voice suggested she had discovered something important about the phantom calls. When I arrived at the station, she was waiting with documentation that would explain the impossible calls we'd been receiving. "The calls aren't coming from our dimension of reality," Dr. Williams said, showing me computer printouts covered with technical data. "They're somehow crossing over from parallel events that are occurring in the same locations, but in different timelines or realities." "What does that mean?" "The theory is that multiple versions of reality exist simultaneously, with slightly different events occurring in each version. Sometimes, under specific conditions, communication can cross between these parallel realities." Dr. Williams explained that quantum physicists had theorized about parallel dimensions for decades, but there had never been practical evidence of communication between different realities. The phantom calls appeared to be the first documented case of cross-dimensional emergency communication. In one version of reality, there's a house at 1847 Maple Grove Drive where a domestic disturbance is occurring, Dr. Williams continued. In another reality, apartment building 923 Oak Street is still occupied and domestic violence is taking place. In yet another dimension, 1205 Elm Street still has a house where child abuse is happening. And somehow, their emergency calls are crossing over into our dispatch system? Exactly. The calls are real emergencies, but they're happening in parallel versions of Cedar Falls, where different events have occurred. The houses that burned down or were demolished in our reality still exist in other dimensions. The implications were staggering. Every phantom call I had responded to represented a real emergency occurring in an alternate version of Cedar Falls. Real people were in danger, but they existed in dimensions I couldn't reach or help. What about the call reporting that I was shot? Dr. Williams' expression became grave. That suggests there's a version of reality where you responded to 1542 Pine Street and encountered a dangerous situation. In that dimension, Officer Barbara Sullivan was shot and killed. The idea that an alternate version of myself had been killed in the line of duty was deeply disturbing, but it also explained why the phantom calls seemed to be targeting my specific, Dr. Williams observed. Something about your presence in this reality at specific times and locations is creating a resonance with parallel dimensions where similar events are occurring. How do we stop it? We don't know if we can stop it or even if we should. These calls represent real emergencies in other dimensions. If we cut off this communication channel, people in those realities might die because they can't call for help. But the phantom calls were creating serious problems for our department. We were wasting resources responding to emergencies that didn't exist in our reality, and the psychological stress on dispatch personnel and officers was becoming significant. There might be a way to communicate back, Dr. Williams suggested. If calls can cross from other dimensions to ours, we might be able to send responses back to let them know we've received their calls. She set up experimental equipment at the dispatch center designed to transmit responses to the phantom calls. The next time we received a cross-dimensional emergency call, we would attempt to communicate with the caller in their parallel reality. The opportunity came 2 nights later at 3:17 a.m. Unit 24, we have a break-in at 734 2nd Street, Tony announced. Caller reports intruders in the house with weapons. I responded to 734 2nd Street, which I expected to be another vacant property. But this time was different. 734 2nd Street had a house on it, a house that had been occupied by the same family for 15 years. I could see lights on inside and a car in the driveway. Dr. Williams, this property is actually occupied. I radioed from outside the house. That's interesting. Stand by while we attempt communication with the original caller. Dr. Williams used her experimental equipment to send a response signal to the source of the phantom call. What happened next challenged everything we thought we understood about the nature of reality and emergency response. Unit 24, we're getting a response from the other dimension, Dr. Williams reported. The caller is acknowledging our communication. Through the experimental equipment, Dr. Williams was able to establish two-way communication with emergency dispatch in a parallel reality. The conversation that followed would be documented and studied by quantum physicists for years to come. This is Dr. Patricia Williams with Iowa State Police Emergency Communications. She transmitted to the parallel dimension. This is Dispatch Supervisor Margaret Johnson, Cedar Falls Police Department, came the response through the experimental equipment. Are you receiving our emergency calls? Yes, we've been receiving your calls, but the addresses don't exist in our reality. We've been unable to respond to the emergencies. That explains why our officers keep arriving at locations where no emergencies are occurring. We thought our dispatch system was malfunctioning. Dr. Williams had established communication with a parallel version of the Cedar Falls Police Department that had been experiencing the reverse problem. Their officers were responding to phantom calls from our dimension. In our reality, Unit 24, Officer Barbara Sullivan was killed responding to 1542 Pine Street, the parallel dispatcher reported. We've been trying to warn your department about the danger at that location. In our reality, 1542 Pine Street is a vacant lot, and Officer Sullivan is alive. We're dealing with cross-dimensional communication between emergency services in parallel realities, Dr. Williams explained to both dispatch centers. Real emergencies are occurring in both dimensions, but the calls are crossing over to realities where the locations don't exist or have different circumstances. The discovery led to the establishment of the first interdimensional emergency response protocol. Dr. Williams worked with both versions of the Cedar Falls Police Department to create a system for properly routing emergency calls to the correct dimensional dispatch centers. We've essentially discovered that emergency services exist across multiple parallel realities, Dr. Williams documented in her final report. Under specific conditions, emergency calls can cross between dimensions, creating phantom calls that represent real emergencies occurring in alternate versions of our communities. The experimental communication equipment was permanently installed at our dispatch center, allowing us to properly route cross-dimensional emergency calls to the appropriate reality. Tony Martinez was trained to recognize when calls were coming from parallel dimensions and to transfer them to Dr. Williams' equipment for proper handling. The phantom calls weren't phantom after all, I reflected during my final report on the case. They were real emergencies happening to real people who needed help. We just couldn't help them because they existed in a different version of reality.